Forced reframing is a sinister manipulation tactic that rewires the way a person interprets their own experiences, especially painful or traumatic ones, often to the benefit of the manipulator. It's not simply about offering a different perspective. It's about forcibly reshaping someone's narrative until they begin to question their own pain, their own truth, and even their right to feel what they feel. The manipulator takes the raw emotion of another person, grief, fear, anger, betrayal, and repackages it with a toxic ribbon of rationalization, making the victim believe that what hurt them was actually good for them, necessary, or worse, deserved. Forced reframing. This tactic is most effective when someone is vulnerable, confused, or seeking clarity. In that moment of weakness, the manipulator inserts themselves as the voice of reason, often disguised as a friend, mentor, or even therapist. They don't just reinterpret the event, they hijack it. If you express feeling abandoned, they'll say, "It wasn't abandonment, it was tough love." If you speak of betrayal, they'll say, "It was a lesson you needed to grow." Over time, this erodes your ability to trust your own perception of reality. You start to wonder, was it really abuse, or am I just too sensitive? Was I manipulated, or did I just misunderstand? That doubt festers. You begin to mute your voice, suppress your emotions, and rewrite your past, not out of healing, but out of guilt and confusion. It's especially dangerous in emotionally abusive relationships, where the abuser reframes their actions to make the victim believe it was done out of care, protection, or necessity. They say things like, "I yelled because I love you," or "You needed to be broken down to become stronger." Forced reframing is not about healing. It's about control. It's about invalidating someone's truth under the guise of wisdom. And the more the victim accepts this new narrative, the more deeply they fall into dependency. It becomes harder to leave, to speak out, or even to remember what it felt like to be whole. What makes this tactic so terrifying is that it's dressed up as help, cloaked in false enlightenment, but beneath it lies a calculated effort to erase a person's emotional autonomy. Synthetic empathy. Synthetic empathy is the calculated simulation of care, concern, and emotional understanding, crafted not from genuine feeling, but from a cold intention to manipulate, control, or deceive. Unlike true empathy, which is rooted in shared human experience and emotional resonance, synthetic empathy is a performance. It's the practiced nods, the perfectly timed sighs, the rehearsed phrases that sound like compassion but carry no soul, and its danger lies in its brilliance because it feels real. This tactic is most often used by narcissists, abusers, cult leaders, manipulative bosses, or anyone who seeks power over others without earning trust authentically. They watch, they study, they learn the scripts of what empathy looks like. They mirror your pain, echo your emotions, and offer soothing words that make you believe, finally, someone understands me. But they don't. They never did. What they understand is what you need to hear to let your guard down. Synthetic empathy is used to open emotional doors that would otherwise stay locked. It makes you confess your secrets, expose your wounds, and place your faith in the hands of someone who has no intention of protecting it. They use your vulnerability like a locksmith uses a skeleton key, not to enter your world gently, but to take what they want once inside. They'll remember the exact words you said when you were crying at 3 a.m., and they'll use them later, not to comfort you again, but to cut you where it hurts the most. This tactic is especially effective in toxic relationships, both romantic and professional. The manipulator wraps their exploitation in emotional language. "I only did it because I care. You can talk to me about anything. No one understands you like I do." And for a moment, you believe them. You feel seen, safe, until the mask slips and you realize that empathy was never about you. It was a tool to gain access. Synthetic empathy creates a bond that feels sacred but is entirely one-sided. It's betrayal wearing the skin of kindness. And once you recognize it for what it is, the betrayal cuts deeper because what was stolen wasn't just trust. It was the illusion that someone finally understood your pain. Boundary flooding. Boundary flooding is the relentless, calculated erosion of a person's emotional, physical, or psychological limits, not through brute force, but through constant, low-grade intrusions that eventually overwhelm their capacity to say no. It's not one major violation, it's 1,000 small ones, each too subtle to call out, each designed to seem harmless, until one day you find yourself tolerating things you never would have imagined accepting. This manipulation tactic is especially dangerous because it disguises itself as closeness, intimacy, or care. The manipulator will message constantly, show up uninvited, ask deeply personal questions early on, or push for favors that feel just slightly inappropriate. They'll test your boundaries in minor ways, borrowing your time, your energy, your space, until it no longer feels like you have the right to keep anything for yourself. They make you question whether you're being too rigid, too selfish, too cold. If you try to assert a line, "I need space," "That's private," "I'm not ready," they react with guilt-tripping, mock hurt, or veiled accusations. "I thought we were closer than that." "Wow, I didn't expect you to be so distant." And so, out of discomfort or fear of being seen as rude, you let it slide. Again and again. Over time, your nervous system adjusts. You stop flinching at the constant texts. You begin explaining yourself when you shouldn't have to. You feel obligated to answer, to accommodate, to overshare, to sacrifice, because the slow drip of pressure never gave you a chance to recover. You're flooded. What makes boundary flooding so insidious is that it doesn't feel like an attack. It feels like someone just really cares. That's the trap. The manipulator uses your empathy against you, your desire to be kind and understanding. And they don't stop when they get what they want. They stop when there's nothing left that feels truly yours. When boundaries are crossed repeatedly, not with force but with subtlety, you don't just lose control, you lose your sense of self. You begin to forget where you end and they begin. That's what they want. Total access. Because someone who can't say no becomes someone who can't resist, and someone who can't resist is easy to control. Expectation engineering. Expectation engineering is the subtle, methodical conditioning of a person to lower their standards, stretch their tolerance, and accept less than they deserve without even realizing it's happening. It is not about breaking someone. It's about bending them slowly until what once would have been intolerable becomes routine. This is manipulation disguised as normalization. At the start, the manipulator sets the bar just high enough. They might be charming, attentive, generous, even ideal. You feel chosen, seen, valued, but then, inch by inch, they begin to pull back. They cancel plans. They get cold. They forget important details. And when you bring it up, they act surprised or hurt. You expect too much. "I've just been busy." "Can I make one mistake?" The more you protest, the more they make you question whether your needs are unreasonable. So you adapt. You stop asking for what you want. You begin to feel guilty for expecting consistency, respect, or effort. You learn to be grateful for scraps, the occasional nice text, the rare compliment, the brief moments they seem like the person they used to be. What you don't see is that those moments are strategically placed just to keep you from leaving. That's the design. Expectation engineering thrives in relationships where one person holds emotional power and uses it to rewrite the rules of what love, loyalty, or friendship should look like. It happens in toxic workplaces, where employees are first praised, then overworked, and eventually expected to be grateful for being treated decently some of the time. It happens in families where affection is withheld until obedience is shown, and it's effective because it doesn't break boundaries. It redefines them. The most terrifying part is how invisible the shift feels. You don't even realize how far you've fallen until someone from the outside says, "Wait, they said what to you?" And suddenly you see it all. How you were trained to settle, how your silence was bought with temporary peace, how your hope was weaponized. Expectation engineering doesn't leave bruises, it leaves beliefs. Beliefs that you're too needy, that this is the best you'll get, that discomfort is just part of connection. But none of that is true. That's the illusion they built, and they made you help build it. Emotional ventriloquism. Emotional ventriloquism is the psychological act of speaking your feelings for you, twisting your emotions into words that serve the manipulator's agenda while stealing your voice in the process. It's not always loud. It doesn't have to be. Often, it's quiet and smooth, delivered with confidence and faux concern. You're not really mad, you're just tired. You're only upset because you're insecure. You're not actually hurt, you're just being dramatic. And if it's said enough, with just the right amount of condescension, you begin to wonder if they're right. That's what makes this tactic so devastating. It convinces you to mistrust your own internal compass. You learn to look outward instead of inward for emotional truth, handing over the power to define your reality. It doesn't take long before you begin asking, "What's wrong with me?" instead of, "What's wrong with how I'm being treated?" The manipulator becomes the interpreter of your mind, translating your pain into palatable explanations that excuse their behavior and invalidate yours. This tactic is used by toxic partners, gaslighting parents, controlling friends, and abusive leaders. It's deployed to dismiss confrontation, avoid accountability, or minimize a person's experience. When you're crying, they'll say you're overreacting. When you're angry, they'll say you're hormonal. When you're scared, they'll call you paranoid. Every emotion you try to express is intercepted, repackaged, and handed back to you as something distorted, something shameful. Over time, you stop trying. You lose the language for your own experience. You smile when you're aching, laugh when you're angry, stay silent when you're violated. You become fluent in someone else's version of you. That's the ultimate goal of emotional ventriloquism, not just to speak for you, but to make you forget how to speak for yourself. The horror of this manipulation is that it rewrites the relationship between you and your emotions. You begin to feel disconnected from your own reactions. You hesitate before expressing anything, wondering if what you feel is even valid. The manipulator trains you to believe that they know you better than you know yourself. And once they've convinced you of that, they own you. Because when someone else defines your feelings, they define your decisions. And when they own your emotions, they control your reality. Complicity guilt. Complicity guilt is a deeply manipulative tactic that traps someone in shame by convincing them they were part of a wrongdoing, even if they weren't, or if their role was entirely fabricated. It's a psychological ambush that rewrites your memory, turning you from a victim or bystander into a co-conspirator. And once you believe you share the blame, you become easier to silence, easier to control, and easier to keep around. The manipulator uses this tactic to shift the focus away from their actions and onto your supposed involvement. They say things like, "Well, you didn't stop me," or "You were there too, remember?" They twist time, language, and emotional context until you're questioning your own innocence. They don't need you to feel entirely guilty, just guilty enough that you won't walk away, speak up, or demand accountability. It starts subtly. Maybe they make a morally questionable choice and later say, "You were fine with it at the time." Maybe they manipulate someone else and later imply, "You knew what we were doing." You didn't, but the seed is planted, and now every time you want to confront them or escape, you hesitate. Because if you were complicit, if you let it happen, who are you to judge? That hesitation is their control. This tactic is especially effective in toxic relationships, group dynamics, or cult-like environments where the lines between loyalty and morality are deliberately blurred. People become bound not by love or respect, but by shared silence, shared secrets, and the fear of being exposed as part of it. The manipulator makes you believe that walking away would mean betraying them, or worse, outing yourself. Complicity. Guilt corrodes your inner voice. You stop trusting your instincts. You minimize your own discomfort. You carry weight that doesn't belong to you. And the more guilt you feel, the more responsible you believe you are for keeping the relationship or group intact. You become the keeper of their sins, and your silence becomes the price for peace. What makes complicity guilt so devastating is that it weaponizes your conscience. It turns your empathy against you. You don't just feel hurt, you feel dirty. And once that happens, the person who should be held accountable becomes the one being protected by you. Authenticity theft. Authenticity theft is the calculated hijacking of your identity, not by force, but by imitation, mimicry, and emotional manipulation, until you begin to feel like a stranger in your own skin. It starts innocently. Someone enters your life and seems to understand you in a way no one else has. They echo your beliefs, mirror your passions, adopt your slang, your music, your struggles. You feel seen, reflected, understood. You think you found someone who gets you, but what you've really found is someone who's studying you. The manipulator doesn't admire your authenticity. They harvest it. They observe what makes you vibrant, unique, powerful, and they replicate it with surgical precision. They wear your identity like a costume, tailoring your values to fit their narrative. They may adopt your social causes, your artistic style, even your pain, parading it around to gain sympathy or admiration from others. And while they bask in the praise, you begin to fade. You'll notice it when your stories start coming out of their mouth, told with more flair, more drama, and suddenly more attention. You'll notice it when people say, "They remind me of you," but you feel like the echo. And worse, if you ever confront them, they'll flip the script. You're just jealous. You're being paranoid. You don't own these things. They gaslight you into silence while continuing to steal the very parts of you that make you feel real. What's most chilling about authenticity theft is how it turns your identity into a battleground. You start to shrink away from your own ideas and interests because they no longer feel like yours. You second-guess your style, your words, your passions, because someone else is now doing them louder, bolder, more publicly. The self-doubt creeps in like smoke. Maybe they do it better. Maybe I wasn't that original after all. And with every piece of yourself you discard, they grow stronger in your image. Authenticity theft doesn't just strip you of credit. It robs you of selfhood. It's spiritual plagiarism, a slow erasure. And by the time you realize what's happened, you're left watching someone else wear your soul, while the world claps for them and forgets you. Insecurity cultivation. Insecurity cultivation is the deliberate and systematic act of making someone doubt their worth, their judgment, and their desirability until their entire sense of self becomes dependent on the manipulator's approval. It doesn't happen all at once. It's slow, surgical, a drip feed of subtle jabs, backhanded compliments, and carefully timed silences that chip away at your confidence while making it seem like concern, honesty, or even love. The person using this tactic doesn't attack you outright. They gently question your choices. Are you sure that's what you want to wear? They joke about your intelligence in front of others. You're cute when you try to be deep. They act surprised when others compliment you. Wow, they really said that? Interesting. Each comment seems small, harmless, playful even, but over time, it changes you. You start second-guessing yourself. You ask for opinions more than you used to. You wonder why you never noticed how flawed you are before. And that's exactly what they want, because as your self-esteem erodes, their influence grows. You begin to look to them for validation, for reassurance, for identity. Your power shifts into their hands. The brilliance of insecurity cultivation lies in its invisibility. From the outside, no one sees the bruises because there are none. No one hears the insults because they're too soft, too well dressed in humor or concern. And by the time you recognize the pattern, you're already in too deep, disoriented, uncertain, and quietly convinced that the problem is you. This tactic is often used in toxic, romantic relationships, controlling friendships, and exploitative workplaces. A partner might subtly compare you to others, always making you feel just slightly less attractive, less smart, less valuable. A boss might praise you only when you're desperate for it, keeping your confidence on a tight leash. They keep you hungry for affirmation, just enough to stay, never enough to thrive. Insecurity cultivation doesn't just break confidence, it builds dependency, and that dependency is the manipulator's leash. Because when someone believes they're not enough on their own, they'll cling to the very person who made them feel that way, not out of love, out of survival. Overcorrection Trap. The overcorrection trap is a manipulation tactic that lures you into emotional compliance by provoking you into a reaction, then punishing you for how you responded. It's a setup, and it's cruelly elegant. The manipulator does or says something subtly harmful, a passive-aggressive jab, a dismissive comment, an intentional boundary cross. It stings, but it's small enough to question. Still, you react. Maybe you snap. Maybe you cry. Maybe you finally speak up after staying silent for too long. And just like that, they flip the script. Wow, that was dramatic. This is exactly why we can't talk. You seriously need help. Suddenly, it's no longer about what they did. It's about how you responded. Your reaction becomes the focus, the problem, the real issue. The original offense disappears into the background, swallowed by the spectacle of your emotions. You feel ashamed for expressing anger, embarrassed for crying, guilty for asserting yourself. And that guilt, that's the trap snapping shut. This tactic is especially devastating because it exploits your humanity. It teaches you that expressing emotion, even when justified, is dangerous. It conditions you to stay quiet, composed, small. You begin to doubt your instincts. Was I really too harsh? Am I overreacting? Did I make it worse? You end up apologizing for your defense instead of them apologizing for the attack. And they know it. That's the entire game. The overcorrection trap isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a look of disappointment, a long silence, a sigh that says you're too much. It's engineered to make you think the pain started with you, not with them. It manipulates your desire to be fair, to be emotionally mature, to not be the difficult one. And that desire becomes the leash they pull every time you try to fight back. Over time, you stop reacting. Not because it doesn't hurt, but because you've been trained to believe your hurt is the problem. You silence yourself preemptively. You let things slide that should never be forgiven. You perform calmness to survive, and in that silence, they thrive, knowing they've taught you to punish yourself so they never have to. Intimacy bombing. Intimacy bombing is a high-speed collision of forced closeness, overwhelming emotional sharing, and premature declarations of deep connection, all designed to bypass natural boundaries and sink hooks into a person before they've had time to think. It's not about love, it's about control disguised as vulnerability, and it feels magical until it doesn't. At first, it seems like you've finally met someone who gets you. They open up quickly, share painful childhood stories, tell you how different you are from anyone they've ever met. They ask about your dreams, your scars, your fears, and when you answer, they listen with intensity, eyes locked, as if your soul is the most precious thing they've ever touched. It's not flattery, it's not lust. It feels like emotional destiny. But that intensity is a weapon. The manipulator knows that humans crave connection, that we are hardwired to bond through shared secrets and emotional exposure, so they pour everything out at once, not because they trust you, but because they want you to trust them. They want you emotionally naked before you've had the chance to put up a wall. They want you thinking, how could I feel this close this fast if it weren't real? The truth is, it's not real. It's manufactured intimacy, a strategic flood of emotional engagement meant to fast-track attachment and bypass the healthy skepticism that protects people from harm. Once you're in deep, they start to shift. The warmth cools, the availability lessens, they become moody, unpredictable, maybe even cruel. And because the bond feels so deep, so fast, you start working harder to get it back. You begin to chase the intensity. You question whether you've done something wrong. You romanticize the early days, those long talks, those teary confessions, that electric sense of closeness, and wonder what happened. What happened is that you were emotionally hijacked. They created a version of closeness that felt earned, but was actually engineered. It was never about you. It was about making you attach so tightly you'd endure anything not to lose it. Intimacy, bombing doesn't feel like manipulation at first. It feels like fate, like safety, like finally being seen. And that's what makes it so devastating, because when it unravels, it doesn't just break your heart. It makes you doubt your ability to ever trust your own feelings again. Hope dosing is the cruel art of giving someone just enough affection, attention, or possibility to keep them emotionally invested without ever delivering real change, commitment, or resolution. It's the manipulator's slow drip of emotional morphine, not enough to heal you, but just enough to keep you addicted to the idea that things might get better. And that might becomes your prison. They sense when you're slipping away, when the disappointment begins to harden into resolve. That's when they dose you. A sudden apology, a flash of vulnerability, a passionate promise. I've been thinking about us. I really do want to change. You mean everything to me. And your walls, built brick by brick through hurt and distance, begin to tremble. You want to believe them. You need to believe them. Because to accept the truth that they never intended to change would shatter the story you've clung to with everything you have. Hope dosing doesn't happen constantly. It's intentional scarcity that makes it potent. They withhold kindness, affection, or affirmation until the starvation becomes unbearable. Then, with perfect timing, they offer a taste, just enough to spark dopamine, reopen your heart, and reset the cycle. You feel a high that convinces you it was all worth it, that maybe this time it's real, but it never is. The change never lasts, the promises dissolve, the sweetness turns bitter again, and you're left wondering how you could be so foolish again. But you weren't foolish, you were human. Hope is a powerful drug. It overrides logic, memory, even pain. That's what the manipulator counts on. They don't need to be consistent, they just need to be convincing, once in a while. This tactic is especially vicious in abusive relationships, where the abuser becomes both the source of pain and the illusion of relief. Victims find themselves stuck in limbo, clinging to the version of the person they wish existed, rather than accepting the one who keeps breaking them. Hope dosing is not love, it's not care, it's control. It rewires your nervous system to chase ghosts, to wait for crumbs, to call pain patience. And by the time you realize you've been starving, you've already forgotten what real love is supposed to feel like. Reality gaslighting. Reality gaslighting is one of the most soul-corroding forms of manipulation, where the very ground beneath your mind is deliberately shaken until you can no longer trust your own perception of what is real. It's not just about lying, it's about rewiring someone's internal compass, distorting their memory, their instincts, their clarity, until they are completely dependent on the manipulator for a version of reality they no longer feel entitled to define. It starts small. A manipulator contradicts something you remember clearly. That never happened. Or you're misremembering again. At first, you're sure. You recall the moment, the words, the look on their face. But they're so confident, so calm, so insistent. They say you're tired or sensitive or just imagining things. They may even laugh. You begin to doubt yourself. The more it happens, the more fractured you become. You question everything, not just the past, but the present. Did you hear that tone in their voice? Or are you overreacting? Did they really raise their voice? Or was it just your mood that made it seem loud? You start apologizing for things you didn't do just to keep the peace, and they watch it happen, watch you crumble from the inside out. Reality gaslighting is most effective when the manipulator controls not just the narrative, but your access to outside validation. They isolate you, undermine your relationships, make others seem untrustworthy, because if you have nowhere else to check your version of events, you're left with only theirs. And once they control your perception, they control you. This tactic is especially devastating in abusive relationships. One day, you're begging for clarity. The next, you're begging for forgiveness, for simply remembering things the way they were. You feel confused, foggy, unstable. You stop trusting your gut. You learn to look at them before forming an opinion. You become a shell that waits to be told what to believe. And the cruelest part? They'll say you're the gaslighter, that you twist things, that you make them feel crazy, because nothing protects a manipulator more than flipping the script. Reality gaslighting doesn't just change how you see the world, it makes you question if you have the right to see it at all. Contrived coincidence. Contrived coincidence is the deliberate orchestration of accidental encounters, events, or revelations designed to appear serendipitous, but in reality, they are traps set by manipulators to gain access, trust, or emotional control. It's the illusion of fate, carefully constructed to make you believe you're living in a meaningful story rather than being drawn into a calculated web. At first, it feels magical. They show up at your favorite coffee shop. They just happen to like the same obscure band or book or trauma you once quietly mentioned in passing. You bump into them at places you never expected. They message you at the exact moment you're feeling low, saying, "I just had a feeling about you today." It feels like connection, like destiny, but it's not. It's surveillance. It's strategy. They've been watching, listening, collecting. This tactic is especially powerful because it preys on our deep yearning for meaningful connection. When someone seems to share your inner world without needing to be told, it doesn't just feel rare, it feels divine. You let your guard down. You open up. You bond faster than you would with someone who didn't just get it. That's the point. The manipulator counts on the emotional gravity of these staged coincidences to bypass your skepticism. The more uncanny the overlap, the more significant the bond feels. You don't question why they're always around. You start to believe you need them there, that this was meant to be. But all the while, you're not meeting them. You're meeting a curated projection designed to echo your soul just enough to seduce it. Contrived coincidence can evolve into deeper layers of deception. They might stage emergencies, fake vulnerabilities, or manipulate mutual connections to keep reappearing in your life at just the right moment. Each time, they reinforce the idea that your paths are mysteriously intertwined. But what they're really doing is weaving you into their control using emotional manipulation disguised as fate. What makes this tactic especially chilling is how easily it masquerades as romance, synchronicity, or intuition. It doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like magic. Until one day, you realize the story you thought was unfolding naturally was being written without your consent by someone who knew exactly how to make you believe it was all coincidence. Social leverage extortion. Social lever. Leverage extortion is a manipulation tactic that turns your relationships, reputation, or secrets into weapons. It's the threat, spoken or unspoken, that if you don't comply, submit, or stay quiet, the manipulator will ruin what you care about most: your image, your connections, your sense of belonging. It's not just blackmail in the traditional sense, it's psychological blackmail wrapped in shame, fear, and power imbalance. The manipulator doesn't always need dirt on you. Sometimes all they need is proximity. They may be your partner, friend, coworker, or someone who has earned your trust or faked it. They gather emotional collateral, your confessions, your vulnerabilities, your unfiltered moments. At first, they seem safe, encouraging even, but later, when you resist them, when you start to reclaim your voice, they let you know just how easily they could turn everything against you. People wouldn't see you the same if they knew what you told me. Go ahead, speak up. Let's see who they believe. Don't forget, I know things about you. I could destroy you. And suddenly, you're not negotiating with logic. You're negotiating with survival. Your silence becomes the ransom. You start walking on eggshells, afraid to set off the person who now holds pieces of your life like tripwires. They don't have to pull the trigger. They just have to remind you it's there. This tactic is common in toxic breakups, workplace politics, friend groups gone sour, and abusive family systems. It works especially well on empathetic, private, or high-achieving individuals, people who fear embarrassment, alienation, or losing hard-won respect. The manipulator knows exactly what matters most to you socially, and they dangle it like a blade above your head. You become trapped in performance, careful in every word, every expression, always calculating what they might say, what they might post, who they might turn against you. You're not just being controlled, you're being cornered. And the longer it goes on, the more your world shrinks, because fear teaches you to isolate before they expose you. Social leverage extortion doesn't just use fear, it infects identity. It makes you see yourself as fragile, tainted, always one wrong move away from humiliation. And that's exactly what the manipulator wants, a person too afraid to fight back. Emotional containment. Emotional containment is a deeply damaging manipulation tactic where a person systematically trains you to suppress, minimize, or discard your feelings until you become emotionally mute in their presence. It's not just about silencing outbursts or arguments. It's about slowly rewiring your emotional expression so that your sadness, anger, frustration, or even joy must be filtered through their comfort zone. Your emotions stop being yours. They become liabilities to manage. It often begins subtly. You express something real, something raw, and they flinch, sigh, roll their eyes, or withdraw completely. You're told you're too sensitive, too much, or too emotional. Maybe they don't say anything at all, just go cold. Their discomfort becomes your responsibility. Over time, you learn the rules. Don't cry too loud. Don't show too much. Don't ask for reassurance. Don't be vulnerable unless it's on their terms. If you break those rules, they punish you through distance, silence, or shame. Eventually, you start editing yourself before you speak. You feel the sadness rise, but swallow it down. You rehearse what you'll say, soften the truth, downplay the pain. You want to stay close to them, so you shrink parts of yourself that feel inconvenient. This doesn't just change how you communicate, it changes who you are. Your emotional world becomes a locked box you're not allowed to open, even when it's on fire. What makes emotional containment so dangerous is that it creates the illusion of peace. From the outside, everything seems calm, manageable, drama-free. But inside, you're suffocating. Your emotional needs don't vanish. They're buried alive. And the longer they're buried, the more isolated you feel, even when someone is right next to you. This tactic is especially common in relationships with emotionally avoidant or controlling individuals. They don't want your feelings to interfere with their comfort or image, so they mold you into someone who doesn't make a fuss, someone who smiles when they're breaking, someone easy to manage. Over time, you lose touch with your emotional instincts. You second-guess every reaction. You forget what it feels like to be held when you're hurting instead of silence. Emotional containment isn't stability. It's slow emotional erasure, and the longer you endure it, the harder it becomes to remember that your feelings were never the problem. They were just inconvenient to the person who wanted control. Victim rotation. Victim rotation is a psychological manipulation tactic. in which the abuser constantly shifts the role of victim back and forth between themselves and the actual victim to confuse, destabilize, and control the narrative. It's a maddening reversal of roles where the person who caused harm somehow ends up being the one who demands sympathy, while the true victim is left questioning their own right to be hurt. It starts after you express pain. You try to speak up calmly, maybe even trembling, about how something they did crossed a line. Instead of accountability, they spin, they cry, they lash out, they accuse. I can't believe you'd think I meant to hurt you after everything I've done for you. Why are you always attacking me? You're so dramatic. I'm the one suffering here. And suddenly, you're on the back foot, defending, comforting, apologizing. Victim rotation weaponizes guilt and empathy. The manipulator knows that if they can make you feel like the aggressor, even for a moment, you'll retreat, you'll soften, you'll doubt your anger, because most decent people don't want to hurt someone who's crying. Most people pull back when accused of cruelty. That's the hook. Over time, this cycle eats away at your ability to recognize abuse. You become conditioned to feel responsible for the other person's emotions, even when they're reacting to consequences of their own actions. You stop expressing your pain, not because you're not hurting, but because every time you do, you end up the villain. You learn that conflict only ends when you absorb the blame. What makes victim rotation so disorienting is how convincingly it's performed. The manipulator may genuinely cry, shout, or appear broken, but these emotional outbursts aren't about healing. They're about hijacking the narrative. They turn every confrontation into a twisted play, where the abuser exits the stage in tears and the real victim is left behind in silence, guilt, and confusion. Eventually, you lose track of who's hurting who. You begin to think, maybe I overreacted, maybe I caused this, maybe I'm the problem. That is the goal. Victim rotation doesn't just protect the abuser, it destroys the victim's ability to trust their own truth. And once you stop believing in your own pain, you'll never hold anyone accountable for it again. Punishment, silence. Punishment silence is the weaponization of silence, not as a moment of reflection or cooling off, but as a calculated tool to control, punish, and emotionally destabilize someone. It's not just someone needing space, it's someone deliberately withholding communication, affection, acknowledgement, or presence to make you feel invisible, unworthy, or afraid. It's emotional starvation dressed up as restraint. At first, it's confusing. 1 minute you're having a conversation, maybe even an argument, and the next, they're gone. Not physically, but emotionally. No calls, no replies, just dead air. You ask what's wrong and they say nothing. You try to fix it and they give you blank stares, cold shoulders, dismissive shrugs. The silence is suffocating, not just because of the absence of words, but because of what that absence means. You've done something wrong, but they won't say what. They want you to guess, to sweat, to twist yourself into shapes to earn your way back into their presence. This tactic is not about solving conflict, it's about control, punishment. Silence creates an unspoken rule. If you upset me, I will disappear. I will erase you until you beg, apologize, or break. And so, you begin to self-monitor. You avoid difficult conversations. You sacrifice honesty for harmony. You stop expressing anything that might provoke their silence, because the loneliness it brings is unbearable. It's especially cruel because it mimics the withdrawal of love. You feel like a child locked outside, freezing, staring through the window at the warmth you used to have. That longing breaks you down, and that's exactly the point. They want to train you to associate emotional expression with abandonment. They want to make you afraid of your own voice. Over time, punishment, silence conditions deep insecurity. You start to believe you are too much, too needy, too emotional. You apologize for things you didn't do. You celebrate the crumbs of attention when they finally speak again. And when they return, They act like you were the problem all along, like their silence was your fault, your punishment, your lesson. But the truth is, silence can be a form of psychological warfare. It doesn't yell, but it wounds. It doesn't hit, but it bruises. And those who use it know exactly how deep it cuts. Symbolic guilt induction. Symbolic guilt induction is a covert manipulation tactic that uses objects, dates, rituals, or shared experiences as emotional traps, turning once meaningful symbols into tools of shame, obligation, and emotional leverage. It doesn't scream, it doesn't threaten, it whispers, "Look at what you're throwing away." And suddenly, you're not just dealing with a manipulator, you're fighting the weight of your own sentimentality. This tactic thrives on emotional artifacts: a gift you once loved, a photo from a happy day, an anniversary date, a song you both shared. The manipulator weaponizes these items, not to cherish the bond, but to guilt you into preserving it, even when it's damaging. When you try to set a boundary, pull away, or even express hurt, they subtly invoke the symbol, "But I gave you that necklace the day we said we'd never leave each other. How can you say I don't care? Look at everything we've been through. You're really walking away today? On our anniversary?" Each time the message is the same. If you leave, if you speak up, if you say no, you're not just rejecting them, you're destroying the meaning behind what you once shared. That emotional blackmail is wrapped in nostalgia, in memory, in things that once made you feel safe, and now those same things keep you tethered in silence. The pain of symbolic guilt induction comes from its ability to turn your own heart against you. You remember what that symbol once meant. The moment was real, even if the person turned out not to be. And that contrast, that ache between memory and reality, is what they count on. They want you stuck in the past, unable to move forward, because the past is where their illusion still lives. You start to question, am I heartless? Am I really the one giving up? But those questions don't come from truth. They come from the carefully planted idea that love is proven by endurance, not well-being. That walking away isn't freedom, it's betrayal. Symbolic guilt induction doesn't just hurt, it haunts. It hijacks the parts of us that love deeply, that remember fondly, that hold on to moments with reverence, and it twists them into chains, not made of metal, but of memory. Decision time shrinking is the manipulative practice of forcing someone to make a significant choice under manufactured urgency, denying them the space to think clearly, reflect, or consult others. It is emotional ambush disguised as just needing an answer. The manipulator compresses your timeline on purpose, not because a deadline exists, but because your clarity does. And clarity is their enemy. They hit you with ultimatums. Tell me now, or I'm walking. If you don't decide tonight, the offer's off the table. I need to know how you feel right this second. These statements are not requests. They're pressure bombs. The goal is to flood your nervous system, spike your anxiety, and override your logic. Because when you're overwhelmed, you're easier to steer. When your back is against a wall, they get to pick the direction you run. This tactic often appears in toxic relationships, high-pressure sales, cults, controlling family dynamics, and abusive work environments. The manipulator creates an artificial ticking clock, knowing that when time feels scarce, self-trust collapses. You start to feel like you'll lose everything if you don't act right now. They capitalize on your panic. Your desire to make the right choice becomes the very thing that makes you vulnerable to the wrong one. Sometimes they use emotion to shrink the time even further, crying, yelling, guilt-tripping, pleading, weaponizing their reaction to cloud your focus. Other times they stay eerily calm, confident in how pressure paralyzes you. Either way, the message is clear. You don't get time to breathe, you don't get to think. You decide now, or you lose everything. What's terrifying is how often it works. People say yes to relationships they're not ready for, sign contracts they don't understand, say sorry when they didn't do anything wrong. Why? Because the silence, The fear, the guilt is louder than their inner voice, and the manipulator counts on that silence swallowing you. Decision time shrinking is not about urgency, it's about control. It's about making sure you never get the chance to feel calm, grounded, or free. Because when you do, you might realize you were never choosing freely, you were being herded. Moral reversal. Moral reversal is a chilling form of psychological manipulation where the abuser flips the ethical script, casting their own harmful, cruel, or unjust actions as morally righteous, while framing the victim's healthy reactions or boundaries as selfish, cold, or immoral. It's more than lying. It's a deliberate rewiring of right and wrong, designed to make the victim feel ashamed for standing up, guilty for pulling away, and confused about their very sense of justice. It doesn't start with shouting or threats. It starts with righteousness. The manipulator positions themselves as the moral compass, the one who's doing what's necessary, being honest, or telling hard truths. If they lash out, it's because they care too much. If they invade your privacy, it's because they had to protect you. If they hurt you emotionally, it's spun as your lesson, your growth, or your consequence. Meanwhile, your efforts to defend yourself, protect your boundaries, or simply seek peace are painted as betrayal. You're abandoning me. After everything I've done for you, you're leaving me like this? So now I'm the bad guy for loving you too much? Suddenly, you're not just protecting yourself, you're hurting them. You're cruel, you're ungrateful, you're wrong, and it cuts deep. This tactic works because it doesn't just challenge your actions, it challenges your character. It makes you feel like the villain in your own story. You start questioning your moral instincts. Was I too harsh, too distant, too unforgiving? And once that doubt sets in, your resistance weakens, not because the pain stopped, but because you've been made to believe you deserve it. Moral reversal is common in emotionally abusive relationships, dysfunctional families, and toxic authority structures. Religious, cultural, or ideological language is often weaponized to intensify the shame. They might say you're disloyal, sinful, disrespectful, or weak, but every accusation is a projection because they are the ones violating what's right while forcing you to carry the burden. What makes moral reversal so soul-crushing is that it turns your virtues, empathy, kindness, integrity, into tools of your own oppression. It's psychological warfare masquerading as moral clarity, and the longer you live inside that upside-down world, the harder it becomes to remember that protecting yourself isn't wrong. It's survival. Validation, starvation. Validation, starvation is a subtle but deeply wounding manipulation tactic where someone systematically withholds affirmation, acknowledgement, or emotional feedback to starve you of self-worth until your sense of value becomes tethered entirely to their approval. It is the psychological equivalent of dangling water in front of the thirsty. You see it, you crave it, but every time you reach for it, they pull it back just enough to keep you desperate. At first, it's confusing. You open up, hoping for support, and are met with indifference. You accomplish something meaningful, and they barely react. You express love, and they respond with a shrug or a blank stare. You give, and they take, but never reflect it back. The emotional mirror stays empty, and slowly, your internal voice, once proud and steady, begins to go quiet. This tactic isn't loud. It doesn't insult, criticize, or scream. Instead, it erodes. The silence after your vulnerability, the half smile after your victory, the deliberate lack of excitement, praise, or presence. Every non-response becomes a message. You are not enough. You don't matter unless I say you do. And you start trying harder. You overachieve. You overshare. You overplease, all in the hope of finally being seen, of finally hearing, you did good, but it never comes, not fully, just enough to keep you chasing. The manipulator uses this hunger to their advantage. They become the sole gatekeeper of your worth. Your emotional highs and lows hinge on whether they choose to offer crumbs of recognition. A compliment from them feels like oxygen. A simple "I'm proud of you" becomes rare currency. And if you ever pull away or assert yourself, they tighten the starvation, cutting off what little you had until you crawl back, starving for even a glance. Over time, you forget what it feels like to validate yourself. You doubt your instincts. You stop celebrating your wins unless they are noticed by them. Your confidence doesn't just shrink, it collapses, because you've been trained to believe you're only real when they reflect you back. Validation, starvation, isn't passive neglect. It's active control. It teaches you that love is earned through sacrifice, silence, and shrinking. And once you believe that, you'll do almost anything just to feel worthy again. Ethical substitution. Ethical substitution is a cunning manipulation tactic where the manipulator replaces your personal morals, values, or sense of right and wrong with their own distorted code and makes you believe it's virtuous. It doesn't come with commands. It comes with influence. It doesn't demand obedience. It cultivates confusion. And in time, you find yourself defending things you once knew were deeply wrong. It begins subtly. The manipulator doesn't confront your ethics head-on. They slowly inject doubt. They may challenge your compassion. You're too soft. People take advantage of you, or mock your honesty. You really think the world works that way? Or twist your loyalty. Real love means sacrifice, no matter what. And gradually they introduce their beliefs as more evolved, more realistic, more powerful. They present cruelty as strength, deceit as strategy, control as care, and you start to wonder, maybe they're right. Soon, you're adopting their logic. You excuse behavior that once horrified you. You tell yourself they had a reason, that the situation was complicated, that the ends justified the means. Your inner voice, the one that used to scream, "This isn't okay," is now quiet, unsure, or even silenced entirely. Because when someone convinces you that your morality is naive, your resistance becomes weakness, and compliance starts to feel like growth. What makes ethical substitution so devastating is that it doesn't just affect how you see them, it changes how you see yourself. You begin to believe that going along with harm makes you loyal, that staying silent makes you wise, that swallowing your discomfort is a sign of maturity. You look in the mirror and can't quite recognize who you've become, but you've been taught that this new version is stronger. This tactic thrives in manipulative relationships, ideological groups, abusive workplaces, and anywhere where unquestioned loyalty is demanded. It uses shame to suffocate your conscience and pride to reward your silence. And once your ethics are replaced, you no longer just tolerate the harm, you participate in it. The most terrifying part? You won't always notice it happening, because ethical substitution doesn't scream. It whispers, it flatters, it seduces, until you abandon your truth and call it wisdom, until you stop resisting and start believing. Personal myth disruption. Personal myth disruption is the psychological sabotage of someone's internal narrative, the quiet guiding story they tell themselves about who they are, what they've overcome, and what they deserve. This manipulation doesn't attack the outer life, it strikes the core identity. The manipulator seeks not to argue with your story, but to rewrite it, sentence by sentence, until the version of you that once felt strong, meaningful, and whole begins to unravel into doubt, shame, and dependence. We all carry personal myths. They are how we survive. I am resilient. I am worthy. I am evolving. These beliefs are rooted in experience and memory, often born from struggle, healing, and hard-earned self-respect. But to the manipulator, your myth is a threat, because a person who knows their story cannot be easily rewritten, so they begin to chip away at it. They don't start with direct attacks, they start with quiet distortions. Are you sure that's how it happened? You think you've healed, but you still seem broken. I don't know why you keep acting like you're some survivor. everyone's gone through stuff. These phrases sound casual, even harmless, but they're laced with poison because they make you question the foundation of your own becoming. Over time, they insert their version of your story into the narrative. You weren't strong, you were lucky. You didn't rise, you escaped. You didn't grow, you just moved on and pretended. They cast doubt over your triumphs, minimize your pain, and blur the line between progress and pretense. And when you resist, they accuse you of being stuck in the past, dramatic or self-righteous. You start to censor yourself. You stop telling your story out loud. You begin to wonder if it was ever really yours to begin with. The devastation of personal myth disruption is quiet but total. It severs your connection to your own meaning. It leaves you stranded inside a story you no longer recognize, one written in someone else's voice, with someone else's pen. And once they've taken your narrative, they control not just your past, but your future. Because if you no longer know who you are, they can tell you who to be. Emotional scheduling. Emotional scheduling is a manipulation tactic where the abuser subtly dictates when you're allowed to feel certain emotions and when you're not. It's the gradual conditioning of your inner emotional world, teaching you that your anger is bad timing, your sadness is too much, and your joy is only acceptable when it serves them. Over time, you learn to contort your feelings around their comfort until your emotional life no longer feels like your own. This isn't about them asking for space, it's about them deciding when you are allowed to be upset, happy, vulnerable, or in need. When you cry, they roll their eyes. Can you not do this right now? When you bring up an issue, they sigh. I've had a long day. I can't deal with this. If you're hurt by something they did, they accuse you of ruining the mood or always making everything about you. But when they feel something, rage, sadness, anxiety, you're expected to drop everything. No matter what you're going through, their emotions take priority every time. Slowly, you begin to internalize it. You suppress your tears until they're not around. You swallow your frustration to avoid starting a fight. You start editing yourself in real time, wondering, is this a good time to say this? Will they get mad if I bring this up now? Maybe I'm overreacting. And that's exactly what they want. Because when someone controls the timing of your emotions, they gain power over your permission to feel them at all. In emotionally abusive relationships, this tactic is often disguised as practicality or emotional maturity. They say you're too sensitive, always choosing the worst time, or creating drama for no reason. But what they're really doing is punishing you for being inconvenient, for having needs, for being human. Emotional scheduling teaches you that love means silence, that peace means suppression, that safety means smiling through pain. It doesn't just mute your voice, it rewires your nervous system. You begin to feel anxious before you speak, ashamed after you cry, guilty just for being emotionally alive, and eventually, you don't need their reaction to censor yourself. You do it on your own because you've learned that in their world, your feelings don't have a time or place unless they choose it. Targeted praise. Withdrawal. Targeted praise withdrawal is a precision-guided manipulation tactic where compliments, validation, and positive reinforcement are selectively removed, not out of neglect, but as punishment. It's the intentional silence where there used to be warmth, the absence of acknowledgement where there once was approval, and it's designed to make you chase praise like oxygen until your entire sense of worth depends on winning it back. At first, the manipulator showers you with admiration. They notice everything, your talents, your efforts, your beauty, your kindness. It feels electric, empowering. You bloom in the glow of their attention. You feel seen, valued, exceptional. But then, subtly, the light fades. Suddenly, the things you used to be praised for are met with blank stares or indifference. You try harder, speak louder, push further, but the praise doesn't return. Not until you change. You begin to ask yourself, did I do something wrong? Did I slip? Was I better before? And that's the point. The manipulator wants you to believe the praise was never unconditional, that it must be earned, and that the rules for earning it are unclear, shifting, and entirely in their hands. This tactic is most commonly used by narcissists, controlling partners, toxic parents, and even manipulative bosses. It's especially effective on people who are driven, conscientious, or eager to please. The praise becomes a reward not for being yourself, but for being what they want. And when it disappears, it doesn't feel like neglect. It feels like rejection. You start molding yourself to win it back. You silence your opinions. Subits. You overperform. You shrink. You bend. You become hyper-aware of their moods, always strategizing how to be good enough again. And when you finally receive that tiny scrap of validation, after days or weeks of silence, it feels euphoric, not because it was genuine, but because you were starved. Targeted praise withdrawal isn't just emotional manipulation, it's psychological conditioning. It creates a cycle of reward and deprivation that keeps you addicted to approval you once thought was love. And the cruelest part is, you'll start blaming yourself for its absence, never realizing it was a trap all along. Memory planting. Memory planting is a disturbing manipulation tactic where the abuser intentionally inserts false or distorted memories into your mind so convincingly, so repeatedly, that you begin to question what really happened. It's a psychological heist of your past, designed not just to confuse you, but to control how you feel, how you act, and who you believe yourself to be. This is not miscommunication. It is strategic rewriting of reality, crafted word by word until your memories are no longer fully your own. It often starts with harmless corrections. They'll say, "You're remembering it wrong," or "That's not what happened." Maybe it's about a fight, something you swear they said in anger, but they insist, "I never said that. You must have dreamed it. You're so sure. You can feel it in your bones." But their certainty is sharp, unwavering, and the seed of doubt is planted. Then they go further. They add details to past events that never occurred, but make you feel complicit, ashamed, or unstable. Remember, you agreed to this. You were laughing when it happened. You were fine with it back then. And suddenly, you're spiraling. You start wondering if you've been the problem all along. You start apologizing for moments you don't even fully remember. What makes memory planting so insidious is that it hijacks the most sacred part of you, your truth, your timeline, your identity. If someone can alter what you believe about the past, they can shape how you feel in the present. They can rewrite abuse as consent, cruelty as a joke, neglect as a misunderstanding, and they do it all with the calm assurance of someone who's just trying to help you see clearly. This tactic thrives in long-term abusive relationships, cults, and manipulative power structures where the goal is total mental submission. Once your memories are in question, you rely more and more on the abuser's version of reality. You lose trust in your own mind, and that's when they have you, completely. Memory planting doesn't need to erase your past. It just needs to contaminate it, to smear it with enough falsehoods that you can no longer stand on it with certainty. And when that happens, your reality becomes theirs to create and yours to survive. Trauma mirroring. Trauma mirroring is one of the most deceptive and emotionally invasive manipulation tactics, where someone pretends to share your deepest wounds and darkest experiences, not to connect but to disarm you. It's not about empathy, it's about imitation. The manipulator listens to your story, your heartbreak, your abuse, your loss, and then offers back a near identical reflection, crafted just convincingly enough to make you believe, finally, someone understands. This tactic is particularly dangerous because it strikes at your most human need, to be seen, to be met in the places you've been hurt. When someone mirrors your trauma, it feels like a soul connection. You open up, you let your guard down, you bond fast and hard, you feel safe, but what you don't realize is that this shared pain is often scripted. They watched your reactions, noted your triggers, memorized the shape of your grief, and then constructed a matching mask. They might say, "I went through the exact same thing," or "I never talk about this," but they'll match your tone, your vulnerability, even your timing. It feels too perfect, because it is, and before you know it, you're sharing everything, your secrets, your fears, your loyalty, because when someone seems to carry the same scars, it feels cruel not to trust them. But the connection is counterfeit. There's no shared healing, no mutual support. Once they've earned your trust through this mirrored vulnerability, they begin to shift. They become inconsistent, cold, dismissive, or worse, they use the very wounds you confessed against you. They might mock you later, invalidate your feelings, or twist your trauma to make you question your own memories. What once felt like the safest place to land becomes the most dangerous one to revisit. Trauma mirroring is often used by emotional predators, narcissists, love bombers, and abusers because it grants instant access to someone's inner world. It bypasses the natural pace of connection and floods the relationship with false intimacy. And when you finally realize the mirror was just a trap, it's not just betrayal you feel, it's grief, because you weren't just manipulated. Your pain was impersonated, your healing was hijacked, and the person who pretended to carry your weight was only ever interested in using it to pull you under. Information starvation. Information starvation is a cold, calculated manipulation tactic that involves deliberately withholding key facts, context, or clarity in order to keep someone confused, dependent, and disempowered. It's the slow suffocation of truth. One unanswered question, one vague answer, one twisted explanation at a time, until you no longer know what's real, what's happening, or what you're even allowed to ask. This tactic isn't loud, it's quiet. It hides behind silence, evasion, and ambiguity. You ask them where they were, and they respond with, "Why don't you trust me?" instead of an answer. You ask what's wrong, and they say, "Nothing." You try to clarify a situation, and they brush you off. "It's not important. Don't overthink it." But you feel it, that gap, that missing piece, that gnawing sense that you're being left in the dark on purpose. And you are, because the less you know, the less power you have. Information starvation thrives in toxic relationships, manipulative workplaces, and abusive homes. It creates a power imbalance where one person is always one step ahead, holding the knowledge, the plan, the truth, while the other is left scrambling for scraps of clarity. You start to feel paranoid, needy, even stupid. You ask the same questions over and over. You doubt your right to know, and eventually you stop asking altogether. That's when they win, because now you rely on them for reality. You wait for them to reveal when something happened, who was involved, what it meant, and when they do finally throw you a sliver of truth, you cling to it like oxygen, even if it hurts, even if it's a lie, because any answer feels better than the silence. What makes this tactic so devastating is that it slowly dismantles your confidence, not with insults, but with gaps, with confusion, with the feeling that you're always missing something critical, and the quiet panic that follows. You start second-guessing yourself. You feel foolish for needing answers, and in that fog, the manipulator controls the narrative, because without information, you can't challenge them. You can't defend yourself. You can't escape. Information starvation isn't ignorance by accident. It's ignorance by design, a subtle, suffocating trap that keeps you small, quiet, and always grasping for something they will never fully give. Relational triangulation. Relational triangulation is a manipulative power play where a third person, real or imagined, is deliberately inserted into a dynamic to create competition, jealousy, confusion, or alliance shifting. It's a psychological chess move used to destabilize you emotionally and keep you chasing approval, control, or clarity. The manipulator sits at the center like a puppeteer, pulling strings between people while hiding their hand. This tactic isn't always obvious at first. It can start with casual mentions. So-and-so would never treat me like this. They understand me better than you do. Everyone else says I'm right. Just a few well-placed comments, and suddenly your position feels uncertain. You start to feel like you're being compared, ranked, replaced, and that's exactly what they want: instability. Once you're off balance, you start performing. You try harder to be enough. You overcompensate. You become hyper-aware of your place in their life, in the room, in the conversation. And the more you chase that reassurance, the more they withhold it, because the power lies in keeping you uncertain, not just of your relationship with them, but of how they speak about you to others behind closed doors. In romantic relationships, triangulation can look like bringing up exes, flirting with others, or mentioning friends who allegedly treat them better. In families, it may take the form of pitting siblings against each other, or turning one parent into the ally and the other into the enemy. In the workplace, it manifests as favoring one employee while subtly sabotaging another, creating silent rivalries that distract everyone from the manipulator's own behavior. What makes relational triangulation so emotionally corrosive is the isolation it breeds. You begin to mistrust the people around you. You feel alone even when surrounded by others. And worst of all, you start doubting yourself. Am I overreacting? Am I being paranoid? Maybe they really are better than me. That internal erosion serves the manipulator perfectly, because the more fragmented your confidence, the easier you are to control. Triangulation doesn't just fracture relationships, it fractures reality, and when done effectively, the target doesn't even realize it's happening. They just feel off, unsure, like love is something they have to compete for and lose sleep over. Selective empathy display. Selective empathy display is a manipulative tactic in which a person shows care, compassion, and emotional understanding only when it serves their agenda, while coldly withholding it when it matters most. It's empathy used as currency, not connection. They give it to you when they want something. They take it away when you need support. And over time, you learn that your pain only has value when it's useful to them. At first, it feels real. When you're celebrating a win, they cheer the loudest. When you break down, they hold you just right. You start to believe, this person really understands me. But then, one day, you're in crisis, scared, grieving, emotionally raw, and their warmth disappears. They grow distant, irritated. They brush you off, roll their eyes, say, "Why are you making everything about you?" And in that moment, the message becomes clear. Your emotions are only welcome when they don't inconvenience them. This inconsistency creates emotional whiplash. One day you're comforted, the next you're punished for feeling. You start to internalize the idea that your needs are a burden, that you must earn compassion, that love is conditional, offered when you're easy, silent, or flattering, and withdrawn when you're messy, human, or in need. That's the trap, and it works because humans crave empathy. We are wired to seek it, to feel anchored by it, and when it's dangled in front of us like a prize, we will twist ourselves in knots to win it back. Manipulators who use selective empathy often play the role of the good guy in public, thoughtful, kind, generous. They display empathy strategically, choosing when and who to empathize with. They might show compassion for strangers or people who boost their image, while remaining ice cold to the pain of those closest to them. It's not that they can't care, it's that they won't unless it benefits them. Over time, this imbalance reshapes you. You begin to police your emotions. You apologize for being hurt. You shrink your needs because somewhere deep down, you fear that if you show too much of your real self, they'll switch off and leave you drowning in silence. Selective empathy isn't love, it's performance. And once you see it for what it is, the applause stops and the emptiness echoes. Ideological grooming. Ideological grooming is a chilling form of psychological manipulation where someone slowly reshapes your core beliefs, values, and worldview, not by force, but through calculated influence, masked as enlightenment, moral duty, or emotional connection. It doesn't look like control at first. It looks like guidance. It feels like clarity, but it's a slow erosion of your mental sovereignty designed to make you think you chose to surrender your convictions, when in truth, they were carefully extracted from you. This tactic begins with subtle persuasion. The manipulator doesn't attack your beliefs directly. They ask questions, plant doubts, offer another way to look at it. They tell you they're helping you open your eyes, wake up, think for yourself. But each idea they offer carries an edge of superiority, as if to say, you'll only understand this if you're evolved enough. And suddenly, disagreement feels like ignorance. Resistance feels like weakness. What follows is isolation, not overt, but ideological. They'll frame people who think differently as asleep, corrupted, toxic, or a threat to your growth. They may encourage you to pull away from loved ones who don't get it, to question the intentions of anyone outside the belief system. Over time, your support network shrinks, and they become the central voice in your mental landscape. The beliefs they push might be political, spiritual, religious, or philosophical, but the content matters less than the method. The grooming is in the emotional manipulation, linking your worth to how well you align, linking love to obedience, linking your identity to their approval. If you comply, you are praised as enlightened. If you question, you are shamed as disloyal or ungrateful. Eventually, you find yourself defending ideas that once made you uncomfortable. You repeat phrases you didn't come up with. You suppress instincts you used to trust, not because you were forced, but because they taught you to see your own moral compass as flawed and offered theirs in its place. Ideological grooming is not about expanding your mind. It's about replacing it. It doesn't make you stronger. It makes you dependent. And by the time you realize what's happened, you're no longer sure which thoughts are yours and which were whispered into you so slowly they felt like your own. Hypernormalization. Hypernormalization is a psychological manipulation tactic that warps your sense of reality by exposing you to repeated dysfunction, chaos, or cruelty until you begin to accept the abnormal as normal. It is the slow, deliberate reprogramming of what feels ordinary, achieved not through sudden trauma, but through constant distortion. It doesn't ask you to agree. It just asks you to adjust. And over time, you do. At first, everything feels wrong. The yelling, the silence, the lies, the emotional volatility. You notice it, you flinch, you try to call it out. But the manipulator waves it away. You're too sensitive. This is how real relationships work. Stop expecting perfection. They shame your discomfort, mock your boundaries, and repeat the dysfunction just enough that it starts to dull the edge of your alarm. And eventually, what once felt toxic starts to feel familiar. That familiarity becomes dangerous because humans are creatures of adaptation. If you live in chaos long enough, your nervous system recalibrates. You stop reacting. You stop fleeing. You begin to tolerate the unacceptable, late-night insults, emotional withdrawals, betrayal spun as love. You stop asking, "Is this right?" and start asking, "Is this just how it is now?" Hypernormalization thrives in systems where control is the goal. Abusive relationships, manipulative families, toxic workplaces, even cults or authoritarian environments. It thrives when people are too exhausted to resist, too confused to rebel, and too isolated to remember what peace used to feel like. It doesn't require your belief. It only requires your silence. And when enough people stop fighting the dysfunction, it becomes the new normal. The tragedy of hypernormalization is how subtly it erases your past self, the one who once had instincts, outrage, clarity. You begin to feel like you're the unstable one because no one else seems to notice how warped everything has become. You lose your frame of reference. You question your standards, and that's exactly the point, because a person who no longer knows what healthy looks like won't ask for it. Hypernormalization doesn't just numb you, it isolates you in a false world where harm is routine, cruelty is culture, and survival is mistaken for peace. And when the truth does finally crack through, it doesn't just shock you, it shatters you, because you realize you didn't just survive the dysfunction, you were made to normalize it. Emotional roulette. Emotional roulette is a psychological manipulation tactic where the abuser's moods and reactions are so wildly unpredictable that you begin to live in a constant state of anxiety, anticipation, and self-blame. You never know which version of them you'll get, the warm, affectionate partner or the cold, explosive stranger. Every interaction becomes a gamble, and the house always wins. At first, you blame the chaos on circumstance. They had a bad day, they're under stress, maybe I said something wrong. But soon you realize it doesn't matter what you say or do. Their emotional state shifts without warning, and you're always expected to adapt. One moment they're laughing with you, the next they're stone-faced and distant. You wake up to tenderness and go to bed with silence. You get punished for things you didn't even know you did. Over time, you learn to tiptoe, you scan for mood cues before you speak, you rehearse conversations in your head, you apologize preemptively, you begin managing their emotions as if it's your job, because the cost of getting it wrong is too high. You become addicted to their good moods, grasping for them like a starving person chases crumbs, because when they're kind, it feels like relief, like love, like hope, but it never lasts. The manipulator uses this inconsistency to train you. The highs become the reward, the lows, the punishment, but both are part of the same system of control. You stop focusing on how you feel and start focusing entirely on how they might react. Your nervous system is constantly bracing for impact. You no longer ask for what you need, you just try to survive without setting them off. Emotional roulette strips away your sense of emotional safety. It makes you feel crazy, unstable, overly sensitive, but it's not your sensitivity that's the problem. It's their calculated unpredictability. The manipulator doesn't need to hit you or scream at you to destroy you. All they have to do is make you feel uncertain all the time. Eventually, you forget what peace feels like. You forget what you feel like, because when someone else's emotional weather controls your every move, you stop being a person and become a forecast, always checking the sky, always waiting for the next storm. Virtue weaponization. Virtue weaponization is the chilling manipulation tactic of turning your best qualities, your kindness, your empathy, your loyalty, into weapons used against you. It's the act of twisting your desire to do good into a tool for control. The manipulator doesn't attack your flaws. They target your virtues, and they do it so subtly, so convincingly, that you don't even see it happening until you're drowning in guilt, shame, and emotional exhaustion, all in the name of being a good person. It starts with praise. They'll say things like, "You're the only one who understands," or "You're such a good friend, better than most." You feel seen, appreciated. You want to live up to that version of yourself. But then it shifts. Suddenly, saying no becomes a betrayal. Setting boundaries becomes selfish. Walking away becomes cruel. And the same traits they once admired are now demanded at all costs. When you express pain, they remind you how strong you are. When you ask for space, they tell you how loyal you've always been. When you try to enforce a boundary, they look at you with disappointment and say, "That's not like you." And in that moment, your heart betrays you because you don't want to hurt anyone. You do care. You do want to be the person they believed in. And so you stay, you give, you carry more than you should because you've been made to believe that's what good people do. Virtue weaponization is especially insidious because it doesn't feel like abuse. it feels like a moral test. And when you fail, when you finally snap or pull away or say enough, they make sure you feel like you've lost your integrity. I thought you were better than this. What happened to the person I knew? And the shame that follows isn't just emotional, it's spiritual, it's existential, because they didn't just manipulate your actions, they manipulated your identity. This tactic is everywhere, in codependent relationships, toxic leadership, religious manipulation, and coercive family dynamics. It thrives wherever people are afraid to be bad, afraid to disappoint, afraid to fall short of love. Virtue weaponization doesn't crush you with cruelty. It empties you with praise. It holds a mirror to your goodness, then shames you when you try to save yourself. Manufactured crises. Manufactured crises is a ruthless manipulation tactic where chaos is deliberately created, then used as leverage to dominate attention, control emotions, and keep the victim too distracted, exhausted, or destabilized to question what's really happening. The crisis is always urgent, always dramatic, and almost always unnecessary. But to the manipulator, it's a tool, a smokescreen, a method of keeping you in survival mode so you don't have the clarity or strength to resist. It often starts when things feel calm, too calm. You breathe for a moment and then, boom, they explode over something minor. They disappear for days. They accuse you of something absurd. They create emotional wreckage and pull you into it as if it's your duty to clean it up. And you do, because the panic feels real. You drop your own needs, your plans, your peace, and run to fix whatever they've set on fire. That's the trap. You're so busy reacting to the mess they made that you don't stop to ask, why is this happening? Why does everything feel like an emergency when they're involved? And when you start to come up for air, another disaster hits. A financial accident, a sudden breakdown, a fight out of nowhere. You live in a loop of emotional triage, constantly putting out fires you didn't light. The manipulator uses these crises to maintain power in several ways. First, they keep you emotionally vulnerable. Fear, guilt, and anxiety weaken your resistance. Second, they make themselves indispensable. They'll sometimes create a crisis only they can solve, casting themselves as the victim and the hero. And third, they isolate you. Manufactured chaos takes up so much space that there's no room left for other relationships, opinions, or priorities. This tactic is especially common in toxic romantic relationships and dysfunctional family systems. The manipulator thrives on instability because stability gives you time to think, to reflect, to leave. But if you're always bracing for the next collapse, your mind doesn't reach clarity, it reaches survival. And that's the goal. Manufactured crises aren't random, they're a pattern, a way to keep you too dizzy to notice that the only thing breaking over and over again is you. Preemptive victimhood. Preemptive victimhood is a manipulative tactic where the abuser claims the role of the victim before they can be held accountable, flipping the script so effectively that the real victim ends up silenced, guilt-ridden, or even apologizing for their pain. It's emotional warfare disguised as vulnerability, a performance so well-timed, so emotionally charged that it reframes any attempt at confrontation as cruelty. It begins the moment you try to speak up. You finally gather the courage to say, "What you did hurt me," and before the words are even fully out, they're already in pieces, crying, panicking, telling you how hard things have been for them, how they're doing their best, how no one ever gives them a break. The room fills with their pain, and yours disappears. Suddenly, you're the aggressor, you're the one piling on, you're making things worse. They look at you with wounded eyes and say things like, "You don't understand how hard it is for me," or "I guess I'm just the bad guy, huh?" And your instinct to protect kicks in. Your empathy floods forward. You backpedal. You apologize. That's the trap. Preemptive victimhood is not true vulnerability. It's not about connection or healing. It's a defense mechanism used as a weapon, because if they can cry first, bleed first, break first, they control the emotional landscape. They make it impossible for you to express your pain without looking heartless. They make your truth feel like an attack. Over time, this reversal erodes your confidence. You begin to dread any conversation that involves your needs or boundaries. You learn that your pain only creates more chaos. You think, maybe I am being too hard on them. Maybe now isn't the right time. But it's never the right time, because the moment you try to hold them accountable, they hijack the narrative and bleed louder than you. Preemptive victimhood doesn't just steal your voice, it poisons your empathy. It teaches you that standing up for yourself hurts others, that self-protection is cruelty, that silence is compassion. And if you're someone who values kindness, someone who hates to see others suffer, that distortion will keep you trapped in an endless loop of guilt, silence, and self-erasure. Tactical regression. Tactical regression is a manipulation tactic where the abuser deliberately reverts to a childlike, helpless, or emotionally fragile state the moment they are confronted, criticized, or held accountable. It's not real vulnerability. It's a strategy, a defense mechanism disguised as innocence, designed to shift the focus away from their harmful behavior and onto your reaction to it. Suddenly, you're no longer dealing with a grown adult who just crossed a line. You're dealing with someone who's too broken, too sensitive, or too fragile to be blamed. They may cry, shut down, pout, sulk, or say things like, "I can't do anything right," or "I'm just a terrible person," not to take responsibility, but to flip the emotional burden onto you. Instead of standing in the pain they caused, they collapse into their own. And now you're caught. You want to stay strong. You want to hold them accountable, but it feels like you're kicking someone who's already down. So you backpedal. You soften your voice. You comfort them. You start to feel guilty for even bringing it up. And just like that, the spotlight has shifted from their behavior to your tone, from their actions to your expectations. You go from standing up for yourself to managing their emotions. That's the tactic. Tactical regression works because it taps into your empathy. Most people don't want to hurt someone who appears vulnerable. The manipulator knows this, and they exploit it. They've learned that if they cry first, you won't. If they fall apart, you won't push. And if they look small enough, your anger will feel like cruelty, even when it's entirely justified. This pattern often appears in emotionally abusive relationships, especially where one person thrives on being rescued. It's also common in codependent dynamics, where one partner is conditioned to take care of the other, even when that care comes at the cost of their own needs, boundaries, or truth. What makes tactical regression so disorienting is how convincing it looks. It mimics real emotional struggle, but underneath the helplessness is a razor-sharp instinct for self-preservation. They're not trying to heal, they're trying to escape accountability. And the more often they do it, the more emotionally paralyzed you become. Not because you can't speak, but because every time you try, they shrink until your voice disappears entirely. Boundary hijacking. Boundary hijacking is a manipulative tactic where the abuser deliberately tramples your emotional, physical, or psychological limits, then flips the script to make you feel like the one who's overreacting, unloving, or unreasonable for having boundaries at all. It's not just a violation of your space. It's a calculated invasion masked as love, closeness, or necessity, designed to make you question whether you ever had the right to protect yourself in the first place. It usually starts with a small push. You say you're tired and they come over anyway. You ask for space and they text relentlessly. You say no and they respond with hurt, guilt, or outrage. Not because they don't understand the boundary, but because they want to teach you that yours are optional. In their world, your no is negotiable, your comfort is inconvenient, your autonomy is offensive. When you try to explain why you need a boundary, they twist your words. Why are you shutting me out? I thought you trusted me. You're just being dramatic. What was once a simple act of self-respect becomes framed as cruelty, rejection, or selfishness. And if you're someone who cares deeply, who hates hurting others, this tactic works like poison. You backpedal, you soften, you let them in again, even when every instinct screams not to. Boundary hijacking thrives in emotionally manipulative relationships, toxic families, and codependent dynamics where closeness is confused with control. The manipulator frames their disrespect as love. I only came over because I care. I just needed to talk. I know what's best for you. But real love honors boundaries. It doesn't bulldoze them and then act wounded by the debris. Over time, boundary hijacking erodes your sense of safety. You stop setting limits, not because you don't need them, but because you're tired of the emotional fallout that follows. You start to believe the problem is your boundaries, that you're too rigid, too sensitive, too cold. But that's the lie. The truth is, your boundaries make them uncomfortable because they can't control you when you have them. Boundary hijacking doesn't just violate your space. It rewrites the rules of who's allowed to own it. And if you let it go unchecked, you begin to feel like a guest in your own life, constantly apologizing for wanting peace, privacy, and the simple right to say enough. Exit sabotage. Exit sabotage is a deeply manipulative tactic designed to trap you in a relationship, situation, or system you're trying to leave by blocking, guilting, destabilizing, or outright destroying your path to freedom. It's not always loud, it's not always violent, sometimes it's subtle, even tender, but make no mistake, it is war against your autonomy, because the moment you try to walk away, the manipulator's real fear kicks in, losing control. At first, they might pretend to be supportive. I understand why you need space. I want you to be happy. But as soon as you take even one step toward the door, emotionally, physically, or even just in conversation, the sabotage begins. They might suddenly fall apart. I can't live without you, or blame you for abandonment. So you're just going to leave me like everyone else? You're flooded with guilt, as if your survival is somehow a betrayal. Sometimes it gets uglier. They create financial chaos, sabotage your job, threaten to harm themselves or you. They drag your name through mud to friends, family, or co-workers. They may even fake illness or crises, pulling you back into their orbit through sympathy or fear. Everything becomes high stakes, emotionally volatile, and exhausting. That's the point. They want leaving to feel more painful than staying. Exit sabotage isn't always explosive. It can be quiet. Delays, excuses, promises to change. Just give me one more chance. They may suddenly become the perfect partner, friend, or boss overnight, love bombing you again with gifts, words, affection, attention. It feels like a breakthrough, but it's not growth. It's a trap, a reset button. And if you stay, the cycle begins again. This tactic is most common in abusive relationships, toxic family systems, and coercive institutions. It's fueled by entitlement, the belief that they own your presence, your energy, your loyalty. And when that entitlement is threatened, they don't respond with reflection. They respond with sabotage, because to them, your departure isn't just painful, it's insubordination. Exit sabotage makes you question your timing, your strength, your right to leave. But here's the truth they don't want you to realize. The chaos is not proof you're making a mistake. It's proof they knew they were losing their grip, because no healthy connection needs to be destroyed to be maintained. Only a prison does. Preemptive guilt assigning. Preemptive guilt assigning is a manipulative tactic where the abuser accuses you of disloyalty, betrayal, or wrongdoing before you've even done anything, creating a false sense of guilt designed to control your future behavior. It's emotional handcuffing through imagined crimes, a form of psychological surveillance where you're punished not for what you've done, but for what they fear, assume, or want to prevent you from doing. It often begins with suspicion masked as concern. You mention a new friend or coworker, and they say, "You're probably already thinking about leaving me. You want an evening alone," and they sigh, "I knew you'd get tired of me eventually." You try to assert a boundary, and they mutter, "Just like everyone else, you're going to walk away too." In that moment, they haven't reacted to your actions. They've reacted to a story they've created in their head, and now you're being made to carry the emotional fallout. This tactic works because guilt is heavy. Humans are wired to avoid being the bad guy, and when someone accuses you of hurting them, especially when you haven't, you immediately feel the need to reassure, to fix, to prove your innocence. But that's the trap, because by defending yourself against something you didn't do, you've already accepted the premise that you're capable of this imagined offense. You start walking on eggshells to avoid triggering that pain again. You self-monitor, you withdraw, you comply, not out of love, but out of fear of being seen as the person they've already decided you are. Preemptive guilt assigning often masquerades as vulnerability. The manipulator paints themselves as fragile, wounded, afraid of being hurt again. They don't scream or rage, they sigh, they deflate, they look at you with disappointed eyes, and you feel terrible, even though you did nothing wrong. Over time, this conditioning strips away your freedom. You no longer feel safe making your own choices, expressing your needs, or simply existing without justifying yourself. You're constantly trying to prove you're not unfaithful, not selfish, not abandoning them, because they've convinced you that you're always one step away from becoming the villain in their story. Preemptive guilt assigning doesn't prevent betrayal. It manufactures it. It doesn't build trust. It suffocates it. And it doesn't protect the relationship. It poisons it by making love feel like a crime you're always about to commit. Truth dilution. Truth dilution is a calculated manipulation tactic where the abuser floods reality with half-truths, distorted facts, and selective honesty to blur your understanding of what actually happened. It's not pure lying. It's far more insidious. The manipulator tells just enough truth to make the lie harder to detect, weaving fact and fiction together until you're left questioning not just their story, but your own memory, instincts, and clarity. This tactic doesn't try to replace the truth outright. It weakens it, dilutes it. You bring up a concern and they don't outright deny it. They twist it. "Yes, I texted them, but it wasn't like that." Or, "Sure, I said that, but you're taking it out of context." Or, they overload you with irrelevant details. "You always forget the part where I was exhausted that day," or the fact that you raised your voice first. They bury the wrongdoing under a pile of noise until the original issue becomes impossible to hold on to. Eventually, you start to feel confused, then guilty for even asking. You wonder, am I overreacting? Did I misunderstand? Maybe it wasn't as clear as I thought. And that doubt is exactly the point. The manipulator knows that once you're unsure, you're less likely to confront again, less likely to stand firm, more likely to defer to their version of events. In truth dilution, facts are not denied, they're warped. Emotional abuse is reframed as a bad day. Lies are recast as miscommunications. Betrayal is painted as a gray area. The goal is to drain the emotional charge from your truth until it no longer feels urgent or actionable. So you hesitate, you freeze, and slowly you let it go, not because it stopped mattering, but because they made it murky. This tactic is especially dangerous because it leaves no obvious wound. There's nothing to point to, nothing solid to hold, just a slow, steady corrosion of your reality. And when you finally realize what's happened, it's not just the lies you have to unravel, it's the part of you that stopped trusting your own truth in the process. Truth dilution isn't confusion by accident, it's confusion by design. Because if they can make the truth feel unstable, they never have to be held accountable for what they did in plain sight. Selective amnesia. Selective amnesia is a manipulation tactic where the abuser conveniently forgets their hurtful actions, abusive words, or promises they've broken, while remembering every mistake you ever made in perfect detail. It's a deliberate strategy, cloaked in forgetfulness, used to escape accountability, rewrite history, and leave you questioning your memory, your sanity, and your right to be angry. They forget the time they screamed at you, but vividly recall the tone you used 6 months ago. They don't remember cheating, but they do remember that you once looked at someone a little too long. They forget the promise to support you during your lowest moments, but they remember that you canceled dinner once and disappointed them deeply. It's not just hypocrisy, it's weaponized memory, and it's designed to erase your reality while protecting theirs. When you bring up something they did, they act bewildered. I don't remember saying that. You're exaggerating. Are you sure that's how it happened? Their denial is so smooth, so confident, that you begin to doubt yourself. Maybe you misunderstood. Maybe you overreacted. Maybe it wasn't that bad. You question your own recollection, while they rewrite the past with no resistance. Selective amnesia thrives in emotionally abusive relationships because it creates an imbalance of truth. You're constantly trying to prove what happened. You're carrying emotional receipts, rehashing events, clinging to your memory like it's the last piece of solid ground. Meanwhile, they float above it all, untouched, forgetful, and somehow always innocent. And the cruelty doesn't stop at denial. Sometimes they pretend to forget in order to reset the narrative. You've already had the conversation, the fight, the breakdown, but suddenly they act like it never happened. Like this is the first time they're hearing your pain. You're forced to start over, again and again, re-explaining, re-defending, re-justifying your truth while they play dumb. The psychological toll is enormous. It leaves you exhausted, gaslit, and emotionally threadbare. You begin to feel like you're clinging to a version of reality no one else can see. That's the goal, because once you no longer trust your own memory, they become the only reliable narrator in your life. Selective amnesia isn't forgetfulness, it's control, and the more they erase, the more you disappear with it. Survivor shaming. Survivor shaming is a cruel and insidious manipulation tactic where the victim of abuse, trauma, or betrayal is made to feel ashamed not for what was done to them, but for how they survived it. It turns strength into stigma. It transforms coping into weakness. It's not just invalidation, it's psychological punishment for enduring what should have never happened in the first place. The manipulator doesn't always come at you with cruelty. Sometimes it sounds like concern. Sometimes it sounds like judgment wrapped in logic. Why didn't you leave sooner? If it was really that bad, why didn't you tell anyone? You seem fine now. Are you sure it even happened the way you say it did? Each question doesn't seek truth. It seeks doubt. It plants seeds of guilt in soil already cracked by trauma. And the more you try to explain your pain, the more you're made to feel responsible for it. Survivor shaming is especially common after emotional, physical, or sexual abuse. Instead of asking, what did they do to you? People, including manipulators and enablers, ask, what did you do to let it happen? It's a horrific reversal of blame that makes victims feel not only alone, but complicit. You begin to wonder if your silence, your paralysis, your attempt to keep the peace somehow makes you responsible. And when the abuser uses this tactic themselves, it becomes even more psychologically destructive. They mock your trauma. You're still upset over that? They belittle your healing. You've always liked playing the victim. They accuse you of using your pain for attention, while denying they ever caused it. You're no longer allowed to name what happened without being labeled dramatic, damage, or unstable. Over time, survivor shaming can silence you completely. You stop sharing your story. You stop reaching for help. You convince yourself that maybe you are too sensitive, too broken, too much. And worst of all, you stop feeling proud that you survived. You feel embarrassed by it. But this is exactly what survivor shaming is designed to do, to keep you small, quiet, and full of self-doubt. Because a silent survivor protects the abuser, and a shamed survivor is easier to control than one who knows their pain was never their fault. Self-pity enlistment. Self-pity enlistment is a manipulation tactic where the abuser weaponizes their own misery to recruit your empathy as a shield against accountability. It's not vulnerability. It's not healing. It's performance, designed to flip the emotional dynamic so you stop focusing on what they did and start worrying about how sad they are. They don't deny the pain they caused, you just never get the chance to talk about it because they fill the room with their suffering first. It begins the moment you express hurt. Maybe you finally speak up. What you said really cut deep. Or, I feel like I'm constantly being disrespected. But instead of hearing you, they collapse into their own grief. I'm such a failure. I can't do anything right. Everyone always leaves me. Tears fall. The trembling voice, the downward gaze. They may not scream, but you suddenly feel like a monster for even bringing it up. That's how they hook you, because you do care, and they know it. So they lean into the narrative. I'm trying so hard. You don't understand how much pain I carry. You shift from the one needing repair to the one offering comfort. You start reassuring the very person who just wounded you. You abandon your own pain to take care of theirs, and that's exactly the point. Self-pity enlistment is often used by manipulators who struggle to maintain control through dominance. So instead, they control through helplessness. They play the wounded soul, the misunderstood hero, the victim of circumstances no one else could endure. And every time you inch closer to holding them accountable, they spiral, forcing you to choose. Do you protect yourself or protect them? Over time, this tactic trains you to suppress your needs. You begin to feel that any expression of hurt will only trigger another meltdown, another guilt trip, another storm of sorrow you'll be expected to clean up. So you stop speaking, you start absorbing. You learn to carry both your pain and theirs until eventually you forget yours even matters. Self-pity enlistment doesn't ask for healing, it demands submission. It convinces you that love means always understanding, always forgiving, never confronting. But that isn't compassion. It's emotional captivity disguised as care, and it ends when you realize their suffering is real, but it's not an excuse to erase yours. Emotional isolationism. Emotional isolationism is a powerful manipulation tactic where the abuser systematically dismantles your emotional support system, not by locking you away physically, but by severing your ability to connect, trust, or be truly seen by anyone but them. It's a slow, invisible process of emotional exile, one that makes you feel like you still have people around you, yet somehow you're entirely alone. It doesn't start with screaming or ultimatums. It starts with subtle comments. They don't really understand you like I do. Your friend seems jealous of us. Your family's never really supported you, have they? At first, it feels like protectiveness, like loyalty, like they're just looking out for you. But underneath that concern is a seed of suspicion, and over time, it takes root. Soon, you start pulling away from others, not because you want to, but because they've made you doubt them. You begin filtering your conversations, withholding your struggles, skipping meetups, avoiding vulnerability. You think you're just growing apart, but in reality, your emotional lifelines are being cut off one by one, and the only one left holding space for your feelings is them. But it's not safe space they're offering, it's control, because once you're emotionally isolated, the manipulator becomes your sole source of validation, comfort, and reality. If they're kind, you feel saved. If they're cruel, you feel worthless. Either way, your emotional temperature depends entirely on them. You've lost your mirrors, your anchors, your reference points, and without those, even your pain begins to feel like something you imagined. This tactic is especially dangerous because it doesn't just remove people, it removes your ability to reach out. You start believing no one will understand, that your problems are yours to bear alone, that turning to anyone else would be betrayal. It's not just loneliness, it's engineered dependence. Emotional isolationism isn't about keeping you away from others. It's about convincing you no one else can love you, help you, or handle you. And once that belief settles into your bones, you'll stay. Through the silence, the hurt, the control, not because you want to, but because you feel like you have nowhere else to go. Self-improvement, exploitation. Self-improvement, exploitation is a manipulation tactic where your genuine desire to grow, heal, or become a better version of yourself is twisted into a weapon used against you. It takes your humility, your willingness to take responsibility, your openness to feedback, and turns it into a permission slip for the abuser to tear you apart under the guise of helping you evolve. It often begins in relationships where one person claims to just want the best for you. They frame their criticism as guidance. I'm only saying this because I care. Or, if you really wanted to grow, you'd take this seriously. At first, it feels constructive, maybe even motivating, but soon it turns relentless. They start highlighting everything you do wrong, your tone, your habits, your reactions, your insecurities. Everything becomes a flaw to be fixed, and you start to believe them because you want to grow, because you're already working on yourself, because maybe you do need to change. So you take it. You absorb the blame. You apologize when you're hurt. You swallow your discomfort and call it growth. You let them chip away at your confidence because you've been convinced that your discomfort is a sign of transformation, when in truth, it's a sign you're being controlled. The most sinister part of self-improvement exploitation is how it disguises abuse as enlightenment. It's not yelling or insults. It's the constant implication that you're not quite enough yet, that you're the project and they're the architect. They use therapy speak, motivational quotes, even spiritual language to justify their dominance. This is shadow work. You're just resisting accountability. This is your ego talking. But what they're really doing is dressing manipulation in the language of healing. And it works, especially on self-aware, introspective, or empathetic people. People who want to grow, who want to take responsibility, who hate the idea of hurting others. So they turn inward and ask, what if I really am the problem? Instead of questioning the abuse, they question themselves. Self-improvement exploitation doesn't just harm, it conditions you to thank the person harming you, to see their control as mentorship, their cruelty as tough love, their manipulation as motivation, and it teaches you that to evolve, you must first be broken, not by life, but by them. Weaponized self-disclosure. Weaponized self-disclosure is a manipulation tactic in which someone shares deeply personal, emotional, or traumatic experiences, not to build mutual trust, but to fast-track intimacy, lower your defenses, and collect ammunition for future control. It's emotional bait, a false sense of closeness built on confessions that seem vulnerable, raw, even heartbreaking, and in the moment, it feels real. But later, you realize the truth. They weren't opening up to connect. They were opening up to disarm. It often starts early in the relationship. A first conversation turns heavy fast. They tell you about their abusive past, a betrayal they endured, or the dark thoughts that keep them up at night. You feel honored that they chose you to confide in. You feel safe to open up in return. And when you do, they listen, intently, gently, memorizing every word. That's the trap. Because now you're exposed, and they are too, but only selectively. What they shared may be exaggerated, rehearsed, or even untrue, but what you shared was real, and over time they begin to use your truth against you. Maybe not with a direct threat, but with subtle reminders, emotional guilt trips, or moments of cruel precision. This is just like what you did before, remember? No wonder your dad treated you that way. I bet you'd run, just like you always do when things get hard. Suddenly, your past is no longer sacred. it's a script in their hands. Weaponized self-disclosure is not about connection. It's about control through illusion. It makes you feel like you've met someone who gets it, someone who's been through the same pain, and that shared suffering bonds you. But the bond isn't built on mutual safety. It's built on imbalance. They set the emotional terms. They decide when and how to show vulnerability. And they decide when yours will be used as leverage. This tactic leaves you feeling emotionally hijacked. You may start to distrust your instincts, second-guess your openness, feel ashamed of what you revealed. You think, I should have known better. But how could you? You were shown empathy. What you didn't see was the blade beneath it. Because when self-disclosure becomes strategy, intimacy becomes a trap. And the wound isn't just what they did with your truth, it's that they made you believe it was safe to give it in the first place. Slow identity theft. Slow identity theft is a devastating manipulation tactic where the abuser doesn't steal your money or your name. They steal you, bit by bit, word by word. They erase your sense of self, your values, your voice, and replace it with a distorted version that serves them. It's not done overnight. It's a slow, creeping dismantling of your identity until you no longer recognize the person in the mirror. And worse, you stop remembering who you were before they got to you. At first, they seem fascinated by you. They admire your quirks, echo your beliefs, support your passions. They say things like, "You're not like anyone I've ever met. You feel seen, understood, cherished." But what you don't realize is that they're not connecting with you. They're studying you, taking inventory of your strengths so they can later dismantle them with precision. Then the erosion begins. They mock your opinions. You really believe that? They scoff at your goals. You're never going to do that. It's not realistic. They slowly replace your routines, your preferences, your coping mechanisms with theirs. You start dressing differently, talking differently, adopting their worldview, not because you chose to, but because over time it felt easier than being challenged, criticized, or made to feel ridiculous. They condition you to associate parts of yourself with conflict. You loved painting, but they always interrupted your quiet time. You had strong boundaries, but they called them selfish. You were outspoken, but they said you were too much. So you shrink, soften, conform, until one day you say something and catch yourself thinking, that doesn't even sound like me. Slow identity theft is most common in controlling romantic relationships, cult-like environments, and coercive families. It's especially effective against people who are empathetic, adaptable, or seeking belonging. And once the manipulator rewrites your identity, they own you, not physically, but mentally. Because if they made you, they can break you. What makes this tactic so painful is that it doesn't just destroy you, it makes you complicit in your own erasure. You start handing over pieces of yourself just to keep the peace. And by the time you realize what's missing, you're not even sure how to ask for it back, because you've been taught that being you was the problem all along. Delayed reactions trap. The delayed reactions trap is a psychological manipulation tactic where the abuser stores emotional ammunition from past events, minor disagreements, perceived slights, or even your most vulnerable moments, and waits to use them later, at a moment when it serves their agenda best. It's not about resolution, it's about reservation. They don't react in the moment, they file it away. And when you least expect it, they unleash it, distorted, sharpened, and strategically timed to knock you off balance. At first, it seems like they're calm, mature even. You expect an argument, a response, a conversation, but they go quiet. Days, weeks, sometimes months pass. You think it's been forgotten, you move forward, you relax, and then suddenly, in the middle of an unrelated conflict, they explode. This is just like when you embarrassed me at that dinner 6 months ago, or funny how you're upset now, but you didn't seem to care when you ignored me for an hour that night. You're stunned, caught off guard. You scramble to remember the moment they're referring to. Your mind races, trying to piece together their version of events, but their memory isn't there to heal, it's there to hurt. Their delayed reaction serves two purposes: to reassert power and to retroactively justify their current mistreatment. Because now, the spotlight isn't on what they've done, it's on what you did weeks ago and how that somehow explains everything. This tactic creates a constant state of emotional tension. You never know when something you said or did will come back like a boomerang. You become hyper-vigilant, overthinking every word, every tone, every decision. You apologize for things you barely remember because you're too disoriented to defend yourself. And that's the goal: to destabilize your sense of fairness, clarity, and control. The delayed reactions trap is not about time. It's about timing. They wait until you're vulnerable, until you feel safe, until you're the one asking for understanding, and then they strike. It makes you feel like you're always in the wrong, always behind, always repenting. It turns the past into a loaded weapon and you into a walking apology. Because in their world, nothing is ever truly over. It's just waiting to be used. Desirability undermining. Desirability undermining is a malicious manipulation tactic where the abuser systematically attacks your confidence in how attractive, valuable, or wanted you are, emotionally, intellectually, physically, until you begin to see yourself as lucky to be wanted at all. It's not about love, it's about control through insecurity, because the more you question your worth, the more power they gain. It begins subtly. A comment here, a look there. They might say, "Are you really wearing that?" Or joke, "You know you're not exactly everyone's type." When someone else compliments you, they shrug. They were just being nice. And when you express pride in how you look or what you've accomplished, they roll their eyes or go silent. You laugh it off at first, until it starts to sting. Eventually, you stop trying. You hesitate before dressing up. You second-guess your choices. You begin to rely on their reactions as the measure of your worth, and they withhold praise, affection, or validation just enough to keep you hungry for it. When they do offer a compliment, it feels like oxygen, like something scarce and precious, not because it's meaningful, but because you've been starved. Desirability undermining is especially cruel because it targets one of the most vulnerable parts of being human, the need to feel wanted, desired, chosen. It doesn't just damage your self-esteem, it rewires the way you see yourself. You begin to believe that you're hard to love, that your flaws are louder than your strengths, that your partner is putting up with you, not choosing you, and that's exactly what they want. Because once you believe no one else would want you, you stop looking beyond them. You stop imagining freedom. You stop thinking you deserve better. You stay, not out of love, but out of fear that this is the best you'll ever get. This tactic often shows up in abusive romantic relationships where emotional dependency is built on a foundation of self-doubt. It thrives on isolation, subtle insults, and withheld affection. And the longer it goes on, the more you lose not just your confidence, but the memory that you ever had any in the first place. Desirability undermining doesn't just wound, it rewrites the story of who you are, and it makes sure that story ends with you feeling grateful for crumbs. Emotional data mining. Emotional data mining is a manipulative tactic where someone deliberately extracts your deepest fears, past traumas, insecurities, and emotional patterns, not to understand or support you, but to control you. It's not connection, it's surveillance, and it often masquerades as intimacy. At first, it feels like genuine curiosity. They ask questions no one else asks. What scares you the most? Tell me about the worst thing someone ever did to you. When was the last time you truly felt alone? You feel seen, heard, safe enough to open the locked doors inside you. And that's the point. They want those doors wide open, not to offer healing, but to find your weaknesses. What makes this tactic so dangerous is how easily it's mistaken for vulnerability. You think you found someone who wants to know the real you, but what they're really doing is building a psychological blueprint. Where you break, how you cope, what buttons to push. They store your stories like ammunition, ready to fire when they need to win an argument, gain sympathy, silence your anger, or shatter your confidence. They may use your childhood trauma to justify their bad behavior. Of course you're reacting this way. Didn't your dad leave you? Or turn your insecurities into weapons. You always say you feel like you're not enough. Maybe that's why this keeps happening. They will twist your emotions into tools, repackaging your own pain as evidence against you. Over time, you learn to fear your own truth. You become hesitant to share. You scan every conversation for traps. You start to feel that nothing inside you is sacred, nothing off limits. Even your silence becomes data to them. Why didn't you say anything? Are you shutting down again? Just like you always do, they know how to reach into the most tender parts of you, not to comfort, but to control. Emotional data mining isn't about love or understanding. It's a quiet heist of your inner world. And when it's done by someone you trusted, the betrayal cuts in layers because they didn't just hurt you, they studied you, and then chose to wound you in the exact places you thought were safe. Idealization devaluation cycle. The idealization devaluation cycle is a manipulative emotional roller coaster that begins with intoxicating admiration and ends in crushing rejection over and over again. It's not just unpredictability, it's psychological conditioning. The abuser builds you up to dizzying emotional heights only to tear you down with cold detachment, criticism, or cruelty. And the most terrifying part? You start to blame yourself for the fall. It begins with the idealization phase. You're not just liked, you're adored, worshipped. They call you their soulmate. They say things like, "I've never met anyone like you," or "You're everything I've ever wanted." They text constantly, plan dreamy dates, memorize the details that make you feel truly seen. You think, this is it, this is real, it feels like destiny, but it's not love, it's emotional bait. Once you're hooked, once you've let your walls down and emotionally invested, they flip, sometimes slowly, sometimes overnight. Suddenly, you can't do anything right. Your jokes annoy them, your needs become too much. They start criticizing your personality, comparing you to others, or going cold without explanation. You try harder, you shrink, you question yourself, you ask what went wrong, and they say, "You changed." But they changed, and they want you to think it's your fault. The devaluation is where the real damage happens. You're constantly trying to get back to the idealization phase, craving that original closeness like a drug. You think, if I can just be better, they'll love me like they did in the beginning. But the truth is, the beginning was never real. It was a trap. Then, just as you are about to break, they toss you a bone, a good day, a kind word, a brief return to the person they used to be. And just like that, you're pulled back in. The cycle resets, and with each turn, your self-worth erodes a little more. This tactic is common in narcissistic abuse, trauma bonds, and toxic relationships, where control is maintained through chaos. It doesn't just break your heart, it breaks your sense of stability, leaving you addicted to the hope that the person who hurt you will be the one to heal you. The idealization devaluation cycle isn't a relationship, it's a psychological cage made of praise, punishment, and the illusion of love that's always just one apology away. Selective memory editing. Selective memory editing is a manipulation tactic where the abuser rewrites the shared history between you, consciously omitting, altering, or reframing events to suit their narrative while erasing your reality. It's not just lying, it's psychological reprogramming. The goal is simple but devastating, to make you question your memory, your truth, and your right to feel what you feel. At first, it's subtle. You remember a painful argument where they raised their voice, slammed a door, or said something that shattered you. But when you bring it up, they smirk. I never said that. You're being dramatic. I was calm. You're the one who got emotional. They scrub the memory clean of their behavior and repaint themselves as patient, rational, even victimized. You're left wondering, was I really that reactive? Did I blow it out of proportion? And it doesn't stop there. The good moments are edited too, but only to highlight their generosity, their love, their effort. They exaggerate their role in your happiness while downplaying or erasing their role in your pain. You could have suffered in silence for months, but they'll point to one nice gesture they made during that time and say, "See, I was there for you." They rewrite themselves as the hero, even if you were left bleeding. Over time, you begin to lose track of what actually happened. You stop trusting your instincts. You feel like you need evidence to defend your memories. You may even find yourself repeating their version of events just to keep the peace. And when others ask about your past together, you hesitate, not because you've forgotten, but because you've been made to feel like your version can't be trusted. Selective memory editing thrives in environments where the manipulator holds emotional or social power. They often rewrite events to gain sympathy, dodge accountability, or isolate you. If they can make you question your memory, they can control your perception. And if they control your perception, they control your behavior. This tactic is a slow erasure of your personal history. It leaves you with a timeline that feels vague, warped, unstable, like trying to build your truth on sand. And the worst part is, they do it with confidence, calm voices, steady eyes, as if you're the one rewriting things, as if your truth was never real to begin with. Silent ultimatums. Silent ultimatums are a manipulative power play where the abuser never directly states their expectations or threats, but makes the consequences of not complying so painfully obvious that you feel forced to submit. It's emotional coercion without a single word. No rules are spoken, yet you know exactly what will happen if you cross their invisible line. You feel it in the air, in their body language, in the quiet that screams louder than rage. It often starts after a moment of conflict, disagreement, or independence. You express a boundary, and suddenly they shut down. Their warmth vanishes. They go cold, distant, unreadable. No yelling, no fight, just withdrawal. And you know exactly what they're saying without saying it. Do what I want or lose my affection. Say that again and I'll disappear. Keep acting like this and watch me walk away. The silence becomes a punishment in itself. You start replaying everything you said, trying to figure out what triggered it. You apologize, not for what you did, but for the effect it had on them. You tiptoe, you overcompensate, you bend to avoid the freeze because the fear of emotional abandonment is more unbearable than surrendering your truth. What makes silent ultimatums so damaging is their deniability. If you confront them, they'll say, "I didn't say anything." And technically, they didn't. That's the brilliance of the tactic. It leaves no fingerprints, no proof, just the internal chaos it causes as you scramble to fix something they won't admit is broken. This form of control is most common in emotionally manipulative, romantic relationships, narcissistic family dynamics, and passive-aggressive work environments. It's used by people who want total compliance without appearing cruel. They avoid accountability by never actually stating what they demand, only making you feel what happens when you don't give it. Over time, silent ultimatums condition you to suppress your voice, your needs, your instincts. You start negotiating against yourself just to keep the peace. You live in fear of the next withdrawal, always anticipating their silence like a storm cloud that never fully leaves. Silent ultimatums don't scream, threaten, or explain. They just take. They take your certainty, your stability, your sense of safety in the connection, and they make you do the one thing you promised yourself you never would. Betray yourself to keep someone else close. Control through chaos. Control through chaos is a brutal manipulation tactic where the abuser intentionally creates instability, unpredictability, and emotional turbulence, not to hurt you outright, but to disorient you into submission. It's not about dominance through power. It's about dominance through confusion. They become the eye of a storm they created, forcing you to seek safety in the very person who's tearing your world apart. It starts with inconsistency. One day they're affectionate, present, kind. The next they're cold, distant, or explosively angry. There's no warning, no logic. One small comment turns into a 2-hour argument. One missed text spirals into punishment. You start walking on eggshells, not because of what you did, but because you never know what version of them you're going to get. That's the point. By constantly shifting the rules, the tone, and the emotional climate, they keep you focused on survival. You're too busy managing their moods to notice the deeper manipulation happening. You begin to question your instincts. You overanalyze your words. You blame yourself for their outbursts. You try harder to be perfect, not realizing that perfection is a moving target they keep out of reach. Control through chaos works because humans crave stability. When life becomes a minefield, we seek patterns, anchors, predictability, and the manipulator positions themselves as the only fixed point. I'm the only one who really gets you. You just need to calm down. You're too emotional. You learn to rely on their version of reality, their rules, their rhythms, because yours have been completely dismantled. The damage runs deep. You lose touch with your own voice, your own needs. You start to see your emotional reactions as problems instead of signals. You accept confusion as a normal state of being. You forget what it felt like to feel safe. That's exactly what they want, a relationship where they are the chaos and the cure. Control through chaos doesn't always look abusive at first. It looks dramatic, complicated, passionate, but behind every mixed signal and every volatile moment is a calculated effort to keep you off balance, spinning, and desperate for solid ground. And they never let you stand still long enough to realize you've been living in a storm they built, just so you'd cling to them to survive it. Fearfunneling. Fearfunneling is a dark, calculated manipulation tactic where someone takes your scattered worries, uncertainties, and insecurities and slowly channels them all into a single solution, them. It's the process of amplifying your fears while subtly eliminating every path of comfort, stability, or escape until you feel like they are the only safe option. It doesn't happen through overt threats. It happens through isolation, suggestion, and control dressed up as concern. It begins with small warnings, subtle jabs at the people around you. I don't think your friends really support you. Comments about your workplace. They're using you. You deserve better. Remarks about your family. They've always made you feel small, haven't they? One by one, the pillars that once made you feel secure are quietly corroded. Your relationships, your ambitions, your routines, each is rebranded as unreliable, unsafe, or secretly harmful. At the same time, they present themselves as your protector, your voice of reason. I'm the only one who actually tells you the truth. I just want what's best for you. You're safe with me. They're not solving your fear. They're sculpting it. They direct it away from themselves and toward everything else. And by the time you're fully funneled, you don't just trust them, you need them. You second-guess your friends. You pull away from your support system. You fear judgment, abandonment, failure, and the only person reinforcing those fears is also the only one comforting you. That contradiction is no accident. It's the perfect trap. Fear funneling is especially effective in abusive relationships, cults, toxic workplace dynamics, and coercive authority figures. It thrives on emotional vulnerability, on people who are already unsure, overwhelmed, or craving safety. And once they've narrowed your world down to them, they control not just your choices, but your perception of danger itself. You don't leave, not because you don't want to, but because you believe the world outside is worse. You believe you're incapable, that everyone else is against you, that the chaos will swallow you whole if you let go. But the chaos isn't out there. It was funneled into you on purpose. Fear funneling doesn't keep you safe. It keeps you small, dependent, paralyzed. It turns fear into a leash and teaches you to hold it yourself. Time theft. Time theft is a deeply manipulative tactic where the abuser slowly robs you of your most precious resource, your time, not by stealing hours from your day, but by consuming your energy, delaying your growth, and anchoring your life to their needs, drama, and dysfunction. It's subtle, it's constant, and by the time you realize what's been taken from you, you're already years behind the person you could have been. It starts with small sacrifices. You stay on the phone through long, circular conversations that never end. You cancel plans to manage their emotional outbursts. You wait for them to change. You wait for them to show up. You wait for them to care. And in that waiting, your life begins to shrink. Your goals stall. Your dreams dim. You become someone who is always putting things on hold. But they don't apologize for the time they consume. They expect it. They feel entitled to it. They guilt you into staying late, listening longer, fixing their messes. You're the only one who understands me. I just need you right now. You said you'd be there for me, and each moment you give becomes harder to get back, not just because it's gone, but because they've taught you that saying no makes you selfish, disloyal, or cruel. The truth is, time theft isn't always about hours. It's about life force. It's the years you spent waiting for love to feel safe, the opportunities you missed because they kept you emotionally preoccupied, the parts of yourself you sacrificed trying to keep the peace, fix the situation, or earn the approval they were never going to give. It's the exhaustion that doesn't come from work, but from never being allowed to rest, dream, or be without them. This tactic thrives in toxic relationships, manipulative families, and codependent friendships where guilt, chaos, and obligation are used to keep you close. And the longer it goes on, the harder it is to leave, not because you're trapped, but because you're invested. You think, I've already given them so much, I can't walk away now. But that's exactly how they keep you stuck. Time theft doesn't just waste your time, it devours your becoming. It feeds on potential and leaves behind a life filled with some days that never came. False accountability framing. False accountability framing is a sinister manipulation tactic where the abuser pretends to take responsibility, but only in appearance, never in substance. It's a performance of guilt designed not to repair the damage they caused, but to control the narrative, avoid consequences, and silence your pain. It's not about owning up. It's about owning the spotlight and rewriting the story so you come out looking unreasonable for still being hurt. It often begins with an apology that sounds right on the surface. I know I've made mistakes. I'm not perfect. Or I take full responsibility for what I did. But when you look closer, nothing changes. The behavior continues. The apology has no action behind it. And worse, the moment you express your continued hurt, they throw the false accountability back in your face. I already said I was sorry. What more do you want? Suddenly, you're the one dragging things out. You're the problem now. This tactic is about stealing moral high ground. By appearing self-aware or remorseful, they disarm your anger and invalidate your need for accountability that actually means something. They want credit for growth they haven't done. They want forgiveness they haven't earned. And if you're someone with empathy, a person who wants to believe in second chances, they know you'll feel guilty for not accepting their carefully crafted act of regret. But their version of accountability is hollow. It's vague, general, devoid of specifics. I've been going through a lot lately. I just get triggered sometimes. They rarely name what they did, how it affected you, or what they'll change. It's just enough remorse to shut you down, never enough to move forward. And when they fail you again, they'll say, "See, I told you I wasn't perfect," as if being flawed gives them permission to keep hurting you. Over time, false accountability framing teaches you that your pain is unreasonable, that your need for justice is unforgiving, that asking for real change makes you the villain. It doesn't just block healing, it weaponizes the idea of healing against you. Because in their story, they're already the one who took the blame, and now, if you won't let it go, you're just punishing someone who's trying, even when they're not. Sleep pattern disruption. Sleep pattern disruption is a covert, yet devastating manipulation tactic where the abuser deliberately interferes with your ability to rest, either by disturbing your sleep directly or creating enough emotional chaos that rest becomes impossible. This isn't just about fatigue, it's about psychological breakdown. Sleep isn't a luxury, it's the foundation of mental clarity, emotional regulation, and resistance. When they take your sleep, they take your stability, and that's exactly the point. It starts subtly. They want to talk late at night, always when you're exhausted, when your defenses are low. They pick fights right before bed. They need to resolve something at 1 o'clock a.m., or they stonewall you all day, then open up just as you're drifting off, forcing you to choose between self-care and keeping the peace. You stay up, you give in, because you're afraid of the silence, the tension, the consequences of saying, "This can wait until tomorrow." Other times, it's physical, loud movements, slamming doors, scrolling their phone in bed, turning the lights on and off, waking you with unnecessary questions or accusations. It may not look like abuse, but it's constant and intentional, and over time, your body stops feeling safe at night. Your nervous system is always on. You lie in bed dreading the next interruption, the next blow-up, the next emotional ambush. You don't rest. You wait. Sleep deprivation isn't just tiring. It rewires your brain. It makes you irritable, foggy, and emotionally raw. You become more reactive, more anxious, more likely to blame yourself. You forget things. You cry easier. You stop trusting your instincts. And in that weakened state, the manipulator tightens their grip, because you can't fight for your truth when you're too exhausted to remember what it was. This tactic is terrifying because it mimics real intimacy, late-night talks, emotional vulnerability, just needing to clear the air. But it's not connection, it's corrosion. It erodes your boundaries, it leaves you mentally threadbare, and it teaches you that safety has no time zone, that even sleep is a battleground. Sleep pattern disruption doesn't just wear you down physically, it softens your mind, your memory, your will, and once they've taken your nights, it becomes much easier to control your days. Emotional blackmail. Emotional blackmail is a brutal manipulation tactic where someone uses your deepest fears, guilt, and love as leverage to control your choices. It's not threats screamed in anger, it's threats whispered through tears, through silence, through conditional affection. It's the quiet warning, "Do what I want or you'll suffer." Or worse, "I will, and it'll be your fault." It doesn't start with ultimatums. It starts with vulnerability, strategic vulnerability. The manipulator might cry, collapse, talk about how much they've sacrificed for you. They say things like, "After all I've done for you, this is how you treat me? If you leave, I don't know what I'll do. Fine, do what you want. Just don't expect me to be here after." You're not just making a decision anymore. You're holding the weight of their happiness, their mental health, sometimes even their life. And the terrifying part? You care. That's what they count on. They exploit your empathy like a trapdoor. You want to protect them, comfort them, avoid hurting them, and they twist that compassion into compliance. You don't say no because it feels like abandoning them. You don't leave because it feels like betrayal. You don't set boundaries because it feels like punishment. And the moment you even try, they press the guilt button like a detonator. Over time, emotional blackmail trains you to anticipate their reactions. You preemptively silence yourself. You agree to things you don't want, abandon things you do just to avoid the emotional storm you know will come. You start believing that their pain is your responsibility, that their suffering is your fault, that if they fall apart, you push them. This tactic is especially common in abusive relationships, in mesh families, and manipulative friendships, anywhere love is confused with obligation. And it's powerful because it doesn't rely on physical force. It relies on love. It takes the very thing that makes us human, our ability to feel for others, and turns it against us. Emotional blackmail doesn't look like control at first. It looks like heartbreak, like crisis, like someone needing you. But what they really need isn't your support, it's your surrender. And once they know you'll give it to avoid hurting them, they never have to ask for it again. They just expect it. Love bombing. Love bombing is a manipulative tactic where someone overwhelms you with excessive affection, attention, and praise to create an illusion of deep connection, fast. It's not love, it's strategy. And beneath the grand gestures, constant texting, intense declarations, and whirlwind romance lies a calculated attempt to bypass your natural defenses and hook you into emotional dependency before you even realize what's happening. It feels incredible at first. They say all the right things. They want to see you constantly. They shower you with compliments, gifts, and promises. I've never felt this way before. You're my soulmate. We're meant to be. You feel chosen, seen, cherished in a way you didn't know was possible. It doesn't feel like a red flag. It feels like fate. But that intensity isn't a sign of true connection. It's a trap. The purpose of love bombing is to disarm you. When someone makes you feel that adored, that fast, you stop questioning. You silence your intuition. You ignore the pace because the high feels addictive. You start letting things slide, red flags, boundary violations, controlling behavior, because you're terrified of losing the euphoria they created. And then it shifts. The person who once worshipped you begins to withdraw. They become colder, critical, inconsistent. Suddenly, you're working to earn back the affection they gave so freely at the start. You wonder what you did wrong. You chase the version of them that made you feel like everything you ever wanted was finally real, but that version was a performance, not a person. Love bombing is almost always followed by devaluation and emotional withdrawal, because it's never been about love, it's about control. They give you the high so they can weaponize the low. They hook you with fantasy so you'll tolerate the reality, and the more you cling to the beginning, the more power they have to shape your behavior. You begin to fear setting boundaries, speaking up, or pulling away, because you still remember the version of them that made you feel like magic. You want it back, but it was never real. It was bait. Love bombing doesn't just break your heart, it hijacks it. And once you realize that, the grief cuts deeper, not just for what you lost, but for the lie you fell in love with. Gaslighting is one of the most devastating and reality-shattering manipulation tactics, where the abuser deliberately distorts your perception of events, memories, and even your sanity until you begin to question your thoughts, your feelings, and eventually your grip on reality itself. It's not just lying. It's psychological warfare, waged in quiet, calculated moments that leave you wondering if the problem isn't them, it's you. It starts subtly. You express concern over something they said, and they respond, "I never said that." You react to something hurtful, and they say, "You're being dramatic." You remember something clearly, and they tell you, "You're imagining things." They don't scream, they deny, they minimize, they plant doubt, and when you push back, they act confused, hurt, even offended. Why would you think I'd do that to you? So you question yourself instead. The longer it continues, the more detached from yourself you become. You stop trusting your instincts. You second-guess your memories. You start to feel foggy, anxious, unstable, like you're always one step away from being wrong, irrational, or broken. But you're not. You're under psychological siege. Gaslighting is most powerful when you care about the person doing it, when there's someone you trust, love, or depend on, because that emotional connection becomes the very weapon they use. They make you believe that your perception isn't just flawed, it's dangerous, that if you just thought more clearly or stopped being so emotional, everything would be fine, but it never is. This tactic thrives in toxic relationships, narcissistic dynamics, abusive families, and manipulative power structures. It isolates you, not with distance, but by convincing you that your inner world is unreliable. And the more confused you feel, the more you turn to them for clarity, never realizing that they are the ones causing the confusion in the first place. Gaslighting doesn't just change how you see them, it changes how you see yourself. It fractures your identity, makes you small, compliant, afraid, and it teaches you that your voice is dangerous, your truth is fragile, and your reality isn't yours to trust. That's not love, that's control, and it cuts deeper than any scream ever could, because it turns your own mind into the cage. Stonewalling is a psychologically damaging manipulation tactic where one person shuts down communication completely and intentionally in response to conflict, emotional expression, or requests for connection. It's not a silent treatment born from needing space. It's a cold, calculated refusal to engage, a way to punish, control, and disempower you by withholding presence itself. It happens when you need to talk, when you're hurting, when you're seeking answers, and they go silent. They turn away, look past you, stare at their phone, or leave the room entirely. You ask, "Can we talk about this?" And they respond with a blank stare. You explain your feelings, and they offer no words, no validation, no rejection, just nothing. You may scream, cry, beg, but the silence only deepens. That void, that's the control, because stonewalling doesn't just ignore you, it erases you. It tells you that your pain, your voice, your presence isn't even worth a reaction, that you don't exist unless they decide you do, and that kind of emotional absence wounds in a way words never could. It's rejection that leaves no evidence, abuse with no fingerprints. Over time, you begin to dread bringing things up. You learn that expressing needs leads to abandonment, even if they're still physically in the room. You feel invisible, powerless, small. You stop talking, not because you've healed, but because silence feels safer than the terror of being met with indifference. Stonewalling often follows a pattern. After conflict, they go silent until you cave, until you apologize, until you chase them just to restore peace. It reverses the blame, makes you the fixer, the appeaser. You start to believe you're the one who always ruins things. But what's really happening is emotional blackmail through withdrawal. What makes stonewalling so cruel is that it mimics death in the middle of a relationship. One moment, you're talking to a partner, a friend, a parent. The next, you're alone with your own echo, trying to hold a conversation with a wall. Stonewalling doesn't solve anything. It just silences the person brave enough to speak. And when silence becomes the response to pain, it sends a clear message. Your feelings don't matter here. Only your obedience does. Triangulation. Triangulation is a ruthless manipulation tactic where the abuser pulls a third party into the dynamic, real or imagined, to create confusion, insecurity, rivalry, or dependency. It's emotional chess where you're no longer dealing with just them, but with a carefully placed third piece used to destabilize you. The goal isn't connection, it's control, and the more you react, the tighter the trap closes around you. It starts with subtle comparisons. They mention how so-and-so never overreacts like you do. They bring up an ex. They understood me better than anyone. They casually tell you a coworker complimented them, or that a friend really gets what they're going through. These aren't innocent comments. They're carefully crafted pressure points designed to activate your fear of being replaced or not being good enough. Soon, you start competing for their attention, their approval, their affection. You try harder, love louder, silence yourself faster, not because you feel safe, but because you're afraid you'll lose them to someone who's already been emotionally invited into your relationship, and that's exactly what they want. Triangulation works because it shifts your focus. Instead of confronting their behavior, you're consumed by the presence or opinion of this third person. Instead of trusting your gut, you're wondering what they say about you behind your back. Instead of feeling connected, you feel paranoid. You stop thinking they are the problem. You start thinking you are. In romantic relationships, it often shows up as jealousy games, flirting in front of you, sharing secrets with someone else, or using an ex as a constant shadow over your connection. In families, it might look like a parent turning siblings against each other for loyalty. In workplaces, it's pitting employees against one another to maintain power. But in all cases, the abuser stays at the center. They control the narrative, they provoke the reactions, and then they sit back and act innocent, even exhausted by the drama they've orchestrated. I don't know why you're always so insecure. Why can't everyone just get along? Triangulation doesn't just manipulate your emotions, it isolates you in a storm of comparison and desperation. It makes you feel like you're losing a fight you never agreed to be in, and worst of all, it keeps you chasing validation from the very person creating the game. Projection is a manipulation tactic where the abuser takes their own flaws, guilt, or malicious intent and pins it onto you. Instead of facing their own behavior, they hurl it outward like a psychological smokescreen, forcing you to defend yourself against accusations that belong to them. It's not just blame shifting, it's identity theft of the most corrosive kind, one that rewrites the story so the villain gets to play the victim. You catch them lying, and suddenly you're the one who's dishonest. You bring up their flirtations, and now you're insecure or unfaithful. You confront their neglect, and they accuse you of being emotionally unavailable. They're angry, but accuse you of overreacting. They feel guilty, but claim you're manipulative. It's a hall of mirrors, and every reflection shows a distorted version of yourself you barely recognize, but feel compelled to defend against. This tactic is especially effective because it hits you where it hurts, your character. Most people are wired for self-reflection, especially empathetic ones. So when someone close to you accuses you of being selfish, cold, dramatic, or disloyal, your first instinct isn't to lash back. It's to check yourself. Am I really doing that? Did I go too far? And while you're spiraling in self-doubt, they've escaped all accountability. Projection is the ultimate diversion. The more intensely they accuse you, the more they're actually revealing about themselves. But you're too busy trying to prove your innocence to see the confession hidden in their outrage. Over time, this constant reversal starts to chip away at your self-trust. You begin to question your intentions, your memories, your basic decency. You become quieter, more careful. You stop confronting them, not because they've earned your silence, but because you're afraid of what they'll throw at you next. Projection doesn't just hurt. It contaminates. It forces you to carry someone else's shame, someone else's darkness, someone else's unfinished business, and it manipulates you into thinking it's yours, that you are the problem, that you are unstable, that you need to do the work. But the truth is, projection is the manipulator's refusal to look in the mirror, so they shatter yours instead and make you stand in the shards, wondering why it hurts. Smear campaigns. Smear campaigns are one of the most vicious and cowardly manipulation tactics, where the abuser secretly or publicly spreads lies, half-truths, or twisted narratives about you in order to destroy your reputation, isolate you from support, and make themselves look like the victim. It's not just character assassination, it's psychological warfare launched behind your back, designed to make people question you before you even know a war has begun. The smear campaign usually begins the moment you set a boundary, speak your truth, or walk away. That's when the mask slips. That's when the manipulator, who once smiled in your face, begins poisoning the well, quietly contacting friends, family, co-workers, or mutual connections with concern-laced slander. I'm really worried about them. They've been acting unstable lately. I hate to say it, but I think they're not who you think they are. They frame themselves as the one who tried, the caring partner, the misunderstood friend, the one who endured so much but had no choice but to speak out. And suddenly, people you trusted start pulling away. They act different. They stop calling. You feel the shift in the room, the looks, the doubt. But no one says anything because the story's already been told, and you're not the author. Smear campaigns are especially devastating because they isolate you at your most vulnerable. Just when you need support the most, when you're hurting, healing, or escaping, you find yourself alone. Not because you push people away, but because the abuser got to them first. And now, not only do you have to rebuild your life, you have to defend your reality. This tactic thrives in narcissistic abuse, toxic breakups, dysfunctional families, and power-obsessed workplaces. It's used by people who fear exposure and retaliation, so they go on the offensive first. They know if they control the narrative, they control the perception, and if they control perception, they control everything. What makes smear campaigns so cruel is their invisibility. The lies are spread in private, the damage is done in silence, and by the time you realize what's happening, people have already formed opinions about a version of you that doesn't exist, one the abuser invented. Smear campaigns don't just ruin your reputation, they steal your voice, and they leave you fighting for truth in a room full of people already told not to listen. Hoovering is a manipulative tactic used to suck you back into a toxic relationship after you've pulled away, set boundaries, or left entirely. Like the vacuum it's named after, it's designed to draw you in with powerful force through false promises, staged vulnerability, grand gestures, or guilt tripping. So, the cycle of control, pain, and emotional instability can begin again. It's not about love. It's about regaining access to your energy, your loyalty, and your vulnerability. It begins when you finally find your strength. You go no contact. You speak your truth. You start healing. And just as the fog begins to lift, they reappear, suddenly gentle, remorseful, attentive. They text late at night. I miss you. Please just talk to me. They send flowers, old songs, pictures of shared memories. Maybe they show up unexpectedly, crying, shaking, saying things like, I can't live without you, or I've changed, I swear. Your heart hesitates because the pain is still there, but so is the hope. Hope that maybe this time they mean it, that maybe the nightmare was a phase, that maybe the person you thought they were is coming back. That's exactly what hoovering feeds on, your desire to believe, your love, your compassion, your unfinished grief. But hoovering isn't healing, it's bait. Once you let them back in, the mask slips. The promises fade, the warmth turns cold again. The cycle continues. Idealization, devaluation, discard. And every time they hoover you back, they tighten their grip. Because now you've proven you'll return. Now they know the right words. Now they know how to reopen wounds. Sometimes hoovering looks desperate. Other times it's calculated. They might say they're dying without you. Or they might suddenly act unfazed, posting happy pictures, dating someone new, hoping you'll react. It's all designed to trigger you, to test your boundaries, to see if they still have emotional access to you. Hoovering doesn't come from love. It comes from entitlement, the belief that you are still theirs to hurt, to win, to control. And it's especially dangerous because it can feel like closure, like redemption. But what it truly is a trap dressed as a second chance. And the moment you respond, they know the vacuum still works. Blameshifting. Blameshifting is a manipulative tactic where the abuser refuses to take responsibility for their actions by redirecting guilt, accountability, and consequences onto you or someone else. It's not just denial, it's psychological deflection, a way of avoiding ownership by making sure someone else always ends up in the emotional crosshairs. And the most dangerous part? It works so well that you start blaming yourself, even when you did nothing wrong. You catch them lying, and suddenly, you are the one being interrogated. Why were you snooping? You express hurt over their cruelty, and they fire back. If you weren't so sensitive, I wouldn't have to talk to you like that. You confront them about a betrayal, and they twist the story. Well, maybe I wouldn't have done it if you treated me better. In every scenario, you walk in holding evidence and leave holding shame. Blame shifting is often delivered with intensity, with victimhood, with such passionate certainty that you start to question your own reality. You replay the events, asking yourself what you missed, what you did wrong, how you provoked it. You begin to think that maybe you are the cause of the dysfunction, and if you could just fix yourself, everything would finally be okay. That's exactly what they want, because if you carry the blame, they stay clean. If you internalize the guilt, they stay powerful. They become untouchable, while you become emotionally exhausted, constantly apologizing, explaining, and trying to do better to avoid conflict that was never yours to fix. This tactic thrives in abusive relationships, toxic workplaces, manipulative families, anywhere someone fears accountability more than they care about the truth, and it conditions you not just to excuse their behavior, but to absorb it. You become the emotional scapegoat, the permanent fall guy, the one who never gets to be right, no matter how wrong they were. Blame shifting doesn't just change the narrative, it changes you. It erodes your self-trust. It turns your intuition against you. It teaches you that standing up for yourself is selfish and that speaking truth invites punishment. And the more you believe it, the more power they gain. Not because they were innocent, but because they convinced you they were.